Hello, everyone. Tonight we're going to drift into a gentle tale, a story woven from the soft threads of friendship and the quiet moments that bind two souls. Picture yourself in a cozy village, nestled in a valley where the air smells of fresh hay and wood smoke, the kind of place where the world feels small, warm, like a memory from childhood when you'd curl up by a hearth, listening to the crackle of logs. I want you to feel that. Now let your shoulders soften, let your breath slow. Close your eyes if you'd like, and imagine the golden light of a late afternoon sun spilling over cobblestone streets. The sounds of a bustling market fade into a soothing hum, like waves lapping at a shore. Take a deep breath, hold it for a moment, and let it go, releasing the weight of the day. This is a story to carry you into peace, to cradle your mind as you sink towards sleep. You might find yourself dozing off in a few minutes, and that's perfectly fine. Let it happen naturally. So, before you get too comfortable, relaxed, and drift deep into sleep, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling chatty, drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Now, turn off the light. Maybe switch on a fan for that soft hum of white noise. And let's begin our journey tonight. I am a knight, not the kind you might imagine from tales of grand battles or shining armor gleaming in the sun. My armor is dented, my cloak patched from years of travel. My name is Sir Ulrich, and my life has been one of quiet service, of small acts that mean more than any ballad could capture. My story tonight isn't about quests or dragons, but about a friendship that grew like a sturdy oak, slow and strong, rooted in the everyday. It begins in a village called Eldermoor, a place where the river bends gently around meadows, and the hills seem to hum with old songs. I was passing through, my horse's hooves clopping softly on the dirt path, when I saw him, Thomas, a boy no older than 16, standing by the market square. He was slight, with a mop of chestnut hair falling into his eyes, and he was trying to lift a sack of grain twice his size. His face was red with effort, his boots slipping in the dust, but he didn't give up. I reined in my horse, watching as he huffed and heaved, determination etched into every line of his young face. There was something about him, a spark, a stubborn kind of heart that made me pause. I dismounted, my boots sinking into the soft earth, and walked over. "Need a hand?" "Lad," I asked, my voice low, carrying the gravel of too many nights by campfires. Thomas looked up, startled, his eyes wide as he took in my cloak, my sword, the weathered lines of my face. I can manage, sir," he stammered, but the sack wobbled, threatening to topple. I chuckled, a sound that felt warm in my chest, and grabbed the other side of the sack. Together, we hoisted it onto a nearby cart, the grain settling with a soft thud. He wiped his brow, smearing dirt across his forehead, and gave me a shy grin. "Thank you, sir," he said, and I saw it then, the kind of gratitude that's pure, untainted by pride. We stood there for a moment, the market buzzing around us. Merchants called out, their voices mingling with the clink of coins and the laughter of children chasing a stray dog. The air smelled of fresh bread and apples, and the sun cast long shadows that danced across the cobblestones. I asked his name, and he told me Thomas, son of a miller, who dreamed of more than grinding flour day after day. His words came slowly at first, then faster, like a stream finding its course. He spoke of knights he'd seen passing through, of their horses and banners, of stories he'd heard about honor and adventure. His eyes shone, and I felt a pang in my chest, remembering my own youth, when the world seemed so vast and possible. I don't know why I lingered. I had no squire, no need for one. My life was solitary, my path my own. But there was something in Thomas's voice, in the way he looked at me not with awe, but with a quiet hunger to learn. "Do you know how to hold a sword?" I asked, almost without thinking. His face lit up, then fell just as quickly. "No, sir," he admitted, kicking at a pebble. "But I'd learn fast." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words, the promise in them. The market was quieter now, the sun dipping lower, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. I looked at him, this boy who was all heart and no skill, and made a choice. "Come with me," I said, turning toward my horse. "Just for today. Let's see what you're made of." Thomas hesitated, glancing back at the cart, at the life he knew. Then he squared his shoulders, brushed the dust from his hands, and followed me. His steps were quick, trying to match my longer stride, and I hid a smile. We walked past the market, past the stone well where women drew water, past the bakery where the scent of warm loaves curled into the air. The village was alive, yet it felt like we were in our own world, two strangers bound by a moment of chance. We reached a small field just beyond the village, where the grass was soft and the air carried the sweet tang of clover. My horse grazed nearby, his tail swishing lazily. I untied a practice sword from my saddlebag, a wooden thing, nicked and worn from years of use, and handed it to Thomas. His hands trembled as he took it, but he gripped it tightly, like it was a treasure. "Hold it steady," I said, adjusting his stance, my hands gentle but firm. His shoulders were tense, his breath quick, but he listened, his eyes fixed on me. The sun was low now, its light warm and golden, wrapping us in a glow that felt like a promise. We spent that hour in the field, moving slowly, deliberately. I showed him how to stand, how to balance his weight, how to let the sword become an extension of his arm. He was clumsy, his swings wild, but he didn't complain, didn't falter. Each time he stumbled, he got up, his jaw set, his eyes burning with that same stubborn spark. I watched him, and something in me softened. This boy, this Thomas, was no warrior not yet, but he was something rarer, someone who wanted to try, who wanted to grow. As the light faded, the crickets began their soft chorus, and I knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke to the soft clatter of pots in the village inn where I'd taken a room. The air was cool, carrying the scent of dew and freshly baked bread through the open window. I lay there for a moment, the straw mattress creaking beneath me, my mind drifting to Thomas, his eager face, the way he'd clutched that wooden sword like it held all his dreams. It stayed with me, like a melody you can't shake. I rose, splashed cold water on my face from a basin, and pulled on my tunic, the fabric worn soft from years of travel. My boots thudded on the wooden floor as I made my way downstairs, the innkeeper's cheery hum greeting me. Outside, Eldermore was stirring, the first rays of sunlight brushing the thatched roofs, turning them golden. I found Thomas waiting by the stable, his breath visible in the crisp air. He was bundled in a patch cloak, too big for his slight frame, and he was rubbing his hands together, trying to warm them. His eyes lit up when he saw me, though there was a nervous edge to his smile. "Morning, Sir Alric," he said, his voice cracking slightly, whether from the cold or excitement. I couldn't tell. I nodded, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Ready to learn, lad?" I asked. And he bobbed his head, his chestnut hair flopping into his eyes. I led him out of the village, past the mill where his father worked, the wheel turning steadily in the river's flow. The world felt quiet, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for us. We walked to a meadow just beyond the village, a place I'd noticed the day before. It was flat, ringed by wildflowers, with grass so lush it cushioned every step. The air smelled of earth and clover, and a light mist hung low, swirling around our ankles. My horse, tethered to a nearby tree, snorted softly, his ears flicking as he grazed. I untied the wooden sword from my saddlebag and handed it to Thomas, his fingers brushing mine as he took it. They were cold, but his grip was firm, his eyes steady. "Today," I said, my voice low, blending with the morning stillness, "we start with the basics. A sword's no good if you can't stand right." I guided him into a stance, my hands gentle as I adjusted his shoulders, nudged his feet apart, knees soft. I murmured, tapping his leg, "Weight on the balls of your feet, like you're ready to move." He nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration, and I stepped back, circling him slowly. The meadow was our world now, the distant bleat of sheep and the rustle of leaves fading into a soft hum. I showed him how to hold the sword, not too tight, letting it rest in his palm like a bird you don't want to crush. His first swings were clumsy, the blade wobbling, but I didn't correct him harshly. "Breathe," I said, my voice calm, steady. "Let the motion flow." We moved through the morning, the sun climbing higher, burning off the mist. Thomas's cheeks flushed with effort, his breath coming in short puffs. But he didn't complain. Each time he swung, I offered a small adjustment, tilt the wrist, shift the hips, keep the eyes up. He listened, his focus sharp, though his arms trembled by the end. I remembered my own training. Years ago, the ache in my muscles, the frustration of wanting to be better, faster. I saw that in Thomas, that same hunger, tempered by a patience I hadn't had at his age. It made me want to teach him, to give him what I'd learned the hard way. We paused when the sun was high, sitting on a fallen log at the meadow's edge. I pulled a water skin from my pack and passed it to him. He drank deeply, water dribbling down his chin, and handed it back with a sheepish grin. "It's harder than it looks," he said, wiping his mouth with his sleeve. I chuckled, the sound warm in my throat. "It always is, lad. But you're doing fine." He looked at me, his eyes searching, as if weighing whether I meant it. I did. There was no falseness in my words, no empty praise. He was raw, unpolished, but he had heart, and that was more than half the battle. We returned to the training, moving slower now, focusing on footwork. I showed him how to step, how to pivot, how to keep his balance even when the ground was uneven. The meadow's grass was slick in places, and he slipped once, landing on his knees with a soft thud. I waited, letting him rise on his own, and he did, brushing dirt from his cloak, his jaw set. "Again," he said, and I nodded, hiding a smile. The sun was warm now, the air filled with the buzz of bees and the sweet scent of blooming heather. We worked until shadows lengthened, the light turning soft, golden. As we finished, I took the sword from him, his fingers lingering on the hilt for a moment. "You did well, Thomas," I said, meeting his gaze. His face broke into a smile, tired but genuine, and something in my chest warmed. We walked back to the village, our steps slow, the silence between us comfortable. The river murmured as we passed, its surface catching the fading light, and I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. This boy, this squire, was someone I could trust, someone I could teach. The inn came into view, its chimney puffing lazy smoke, and I knew tomorrow we'd return to the meadow, to the sword, to the slow building of something lasting. I let Thomas go to his father's mill, watching him disappear down the path, his cloak flapping like a flag. I stood there, the evening air cool against my skin, the village settling into its nightly rhythm. The stars were just beginning to prick the sky, faint and silver, and I breathed deeply, feeling the earth beneath my boots. This was no grand tale, no saga for the bards, but it was mine, ours, a friendship born in a meadow, under a morning sun, with nothing but a wooden sword and a boy's stubborn heart. The day had been long, the meadow training leaving my muscles pleasantly heavy, and as the sun dipped below the hills, I found myself craving something simple, something warm. Thomas had gone to the mill to help his father, but I'd asked him to meet me later, by the edge of the village where the woods began. The air was cooling now, the sky a soft bruise of purple and gold, and I carried a small bundle, a loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, and a flask of cider tucked under my arm. My boots crunched on the path, the sound blending with the evening chorus of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Eldermore felt alive, its heartbeat steady, and I let myself sink into that rhythm, my breath slow, my mind quiet. I reached the clearing, a small open space where the trees parted to reveal a carpet of moss and a scattering of stones. It was a place I'd noticed days ago, sheltered and still, perfect for a fire. I set down my bundle and gathered kindling dry twigs and bark, snapping softly in my hands. The scent of pine and earth filled my lungs, grounding me, and I knelt to arrange the wood, striking flint until a spark caught. The flame was small at first, tentative, but I coaxed it with gentle breaths, watching it grow into a steady glow. The warmth brushed my face, and I sat back, the moss soft beneath me, the firelight dancing in the gathering dark. Thomas arrived soon after, his steps hesitant at first, as if unsure he belonged here. His cloak was dusted with flour, his hair a mess, but his eyes brightened when he saw the fire. "Sir Ulrich," he said, his voice soft, almost swallowed by the night. "Didn't expect this." I gestured to the ground beside me. "Sit, lad. No need for ceremony tonight." He settled cross-legged, close enough to feel the fire's heat, and I handed him the loaf. He tore off a piece, the crust crackling, and passed it back, his fingers brushing mine. The bread was still warm, its yeasty scent mingling with the smoke, and we ate in silence for a moment, the fire snapping between us. The cider was next, sharp and sweet, and I poured it into a small wooden cup, passing it to Thomas. He took a sip, his face scrunching at the tang, and I chuckled, the sound low and easy. "Not your father's ale, is it?" I teased, and he grinned, shaking his head. The firelight played across his face, softening the angles of his youth, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames. This was what I'd missed in my years of wandering moments like this, shared with someone who didn't need to fill the silence with words. I leaned back, my hands resting on the moss, and looked up at the sky. The stars were out now, sharp and countless, like scattered diamonds on a velvet cloth. "Ever wonder what they're for?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Thomas followed my gaze, his head tilting. "The stars. My ma used to say they were the eyes of angels, watching us." He paused, then added, "Sounds silly now." I shook my head, my eyes still on the sky. "Not silly. My mother said they were the campfires of warriors who'd gone before us, waiting to tell their stories." He looked at me, his expression thoughtful, and I saw a flicker of that boyish wonder return. We started trading tales then, small ones at first. I told him about the time I'd gotten lost in a snowstorm, my horse leading me to a farmer's barn by sheer luck. The memory felt vivid, the bite of the wind, the creak of the barn door, the warmth of hay as I curled up to sleep. Thomas listened, his eyes wide, the firelight reflecting in them. Then he shared a story of his own, about sneaking into the mill at night to watch the stars through a hole in the roof. "Fell asleep once," he admitted, his cheeks flushing, "woke up covered in flour. Da wasn't happy." I laughed, picturing it, and the sound seemed to ease him, his shoulders relaxing, the fire burned lower, the logs settling into embers, and I added another stick, watching the sparks drift upward like tiny stars of their own. The air was cooler now, but the fire kept us warm, its glow a small world we shared. I told him about a festival I'd seen years ago, where lanterns floated on a river, each one carrying a wish. He leaned forward, his hands clasped, and asked what I'd wish for. I paused, the question catching me off guard. Peace, I said finally, my voice soft. Not just for me, but for everyone. A world where a knight's sword stays sheathed. He nodded, his eyes distant, and I wondered what he saw in the flames. Thomas's turn came again, and he spoke of his sister, younger than him, who loved to braid flowers into her hair. She'd like this, he said, gesturing to the fire, the clearing. She's always begging me to take her exploring. His voice was tender, and I felt a pang, thinking of my own family, long gone. I didn't dwell on it, though instead, I asked about his sister, her name, her favorite flowers. He answered eagerly, his words painting a picture of a girl with a laugh like bells, and I listened, letting his joy fill the space. The night deepened, the air thick with the scent of smoke and moss. We finished the bread, the cheese, the cider, but neither of us moved to leave. The fire was enough, the stories enough. I told one last tale about a knight who carried a locket from his mother, a reminder of home. My hand brushed the small pouch at my belt, where I kept a similar keepsake, but I didn't mention it. Thomas didn't need to know, not yet. He yawned, his eyes heavy, and I smiled. Get some rest. Lad, I said, my voice a murmur. We've got tomorrow. He nodded, rising slowly, his cloak dragging across the moss. Thank you, Sir Alric, he said, and I heard the weight in his words, the gratitude for more than just the fire. I watched him go, his figure fading into the dark, the path lit faintly by moonlight. I stayed by the fire a while longer, the embers glowing soft and red, the stars overhead keeping their silent watch. The clearing felt like a sanctuary, a place where time slowed, where friendship took root. I banked the fire, the smoke curling upward, and made my way back to the inn, my heart full, my steps light. The village of Eldermore was alight with color and sound as the harvest festival swept through its streets. I could feel the energy even from the inn, where I'd spent the morning sharpening my dagger, the steady scrape of whetstone against steel, a soothing rhythm. The air carried the scent of roasted chestnuts and mulled wine, mingling with the crisp bite of autumn leaves. My window was open, letting in bursts of laughter and the faint trill of a flute, and I found myself smiling, the kind of smile that creeps up unbidden. Thomas had mentioned the festival last night by the fire, his eyes bright with talk of dancing and cider, and I'd promised to join him. Now, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, I set aside my work, pulled on my cloak, and stepped into the heart of the celebration. The village square was a tapestry of movement. Banners of red and gold fluttered from poles. Children darted through the crowd, with ribbons trailing behind them, and tables groaned under the weight of pies, breads, and apples. I stood at the edge, my boots sinking slightly into the soft earth, taking it all in. The air was warm with the press of bodies, the hum of voices, the clink of tankards raised in toasts. I spotted Thomas near a wooden platform where musicians played, their fiddles and drums weaving a lively tune. He was laughing, his hair dusted with golden light, and he waved me over, his grin wide enough to bridge any distance. I wove through the crowd, nodding to villagers who met my gaze with curious smiles. A woman offered me a slice of apple, its flesh sweet and crisp, and I thanked her, feeling the festival's warmth seep into me. Thomas was bouncing on his toes when I reached him, his cloak swapped for a simple tunic, his face flushed with excitement. "Sir Alric, you made it," he said, his voice nearly lost in the music. I clapped a hand on his shoulder, the gesture familiar now, and nodded toward the platform. Wouldn't miss it, lad. You promised me a dance, didn't you? His eyes widened. Then he laughed, a sound so free it made my chest ache with something like nostalgia. The music shifted, the tempo slowing into a gentle, lilting melody, and the crowd began to pair off, forming circles on the packed dirt of the square. Thomas hesitated, glancing at me, and I raised an eyebrow. "Come on, then," I said, stepping toward the dancers. A knight doesn't shy away from a challenge. He followed, his steps uncertain but eager, and we joined a circle, our hands linking with those of the villagers. The woman to my left, her hair streaked with gray, gave me a knowing smile, and I returned it, feeling the rhythm of the dance pull me in. We moved together, the circle turning slowly, our steps simple but sure. The music was a current, carrying us along, and I felt the ground beneath my boots, the brush of Thomas's sleeve against mine, the soft laughter rippling through the group. The lanterns strung above us glowed like fireflies, their light softening the edges of the world. Thomas was clumsy at first, his feet tangling, but he found the beat, his face bright with concentration. I guided him with small nudges, my voice low as I murmured, "Step light, lad, feel the music, not your feet." He nodded, his grin returning, and soon we were moving as one, part of the village's heartbeat. The dance ended with a flourish of fiddles, and the crowd clapped, some calling for another. Thomas was breathless, his cheeks red, and I laughed, the sound mingling with the chatter around us. We stepped back, finding a spot near a hay bale to catch our breath. The air smelled of straw and spices, and I handed Thomas a wooden cup of cider from a passing tray. He sipped it, his eyes still on the dancers, and I leaned against the bale, letting the moment settle over me like a warm blanket. The festival was a reminder of life's small joys, the kind that don't demand glory or gold, just presence. We wandered then, drifting through the square. A juggler tossed apples into the air, their arcs catching the lantern light, and Thomas clapped, his enthusiasm infectious. We paused at a stall where a woman was weaving flower crowns, her fingers deft as she twisted daisies and clover. She offered one to Thomas, who blushed but accepted, setting it lopsided on his head. I chuckled, adjusting it for him, and he ducked his head, grinning. "Suits you," I said, and he rolled his eyes, but there was no hiding his pleasure. The crown stayed on, a small emblem of the night's lightness. The music called us back eventually, another dance forming, this one faster, with pairs spinning in tight circles. I hesitated. My knees weren't as young as they once were, but Thomas tugged at my arm, his eyes pleading. "One more, Sir Alric," he said, and I couldn't refuse. We joined the fray, our hands clasped, and spun through the steps, the world blurring into colors and laughter. His grip was strong, his steps surer now, and I felt a pride I hadn't expected, as if his joy was mine too. The music swelled, the crowd cheered, and for a moment, I wasn't a knight, just a man, dancing with a friend under a harvest sky. As the night deepened, the festival slowed, the crowd thinning as families drifted home. Thomas and I sat on a bench near the square, sharing a warm pastry dusted with sugar. The air was cooler now, the stars bright overhead, and the music had softened to a single lute, its notes floating like petals on a breeze. We didn't speak much, but we didn't need to. The night had woven us closer, its threads made of laughter and shared steps. I looked at him, his flower crown still askew, and felt a quiet certainty. This was friendship, not forged in battle, but in moments like these, soft and fleeting. The last notes of the lute faded, and Thomas yawned, his eyes heavy. "Best get you home," I said, rising. He nodded, brushing crumbs from his tunic, and we walked through the quieting village, the lanterns dimming behind us. The path to the mill was familiar now, the river's murmur a gentle companion. At his door, He turned, his voice soft. "Thank you, Sir Ulrich. Tonight was good." I nodded, my throat tight. "It was, lad. Sleep well." He slipped inside, and I stood there a moment, the night wrapping around me, warm and still. The sky was heavy with clouds when I woke, the air thick with the promise of rain. From my room at the inn, I could hear the village-stirring cartwheels creaking, the muffled cluck of hens, but it was quieter today, subdued, as if Eldermore itself sensed the coming storm. I pulled on my tunic, the fabric cool against my skin, and ran a hand through my hair, feeling the weight of the day settle over me. My armor needed tending dents from old journeys, scratches that dulled its shine, and I'd decided to spend the morning on it. Thomas had agreed to help, his enthusiasm undimmed by the gray morning. I smiled at the thought, lacing my boots and stepping into the damp air, the scent of wet earth and straw greeting me. I found him by the stable, sitting on a stool, his cloak pulled tight against the chill. He was whittling a stick, the knife moving clumsily in his hands, but he looked up when I approached, his face breaking into a grin. "Morning, Sir Ulrich," he said, tucking the knife away, ready to make that armor shine. I nodded, gesturing to the small shed beside the stable, where I had stored my gear. "Let's see if we can keep the rust at bay, lad." He hopped up, his energy a contrast to the sluggish day, and followed me, his boots splashing in shallow puddles. The shed was cramped but dry, its walls lined with tools and sacks of grain. A single window let in muted light, and the air smelled of oil and leather. I spread a cloth on the dirt floor and laid out my armor breastplate. Greaves, vambraces all scarred from years of use. Thomas knelt beside me, his eyes tracing the metal's imperfections. "Looks like it's seen some stories," he said, his voice soft with awe. I chuckled, picking up the breastplate, its surface cold under my fingers. More than I'd care to tell in one sitting. I handed him a rag and a small jar of polishing paste, the scent sharp and metallic. "Start small. Work the scratches out. Gentle but firm." We set to work, the shed filled with the soft rasp of cloth on metal. Rain began to patter on the roof, a steady rhythm that wrapped us in a cocoon of sound. I showed Thomas how to rub in small circles, how to feel for the metal's grain. His hands were hesitant at first, but he learned quickly, his brow furrowed in concentration. The armor gleamed where he worked, the scratches fading under his touch, and I felt a quiet pride. This wasn't swordplay or grand heroics, but it was honest labor, the kind that built trust. The rain grew heavier, drumming above us, and I let the sound wash over me, my shoulders relaxing as I polished a greave. We worked in silence for a while, the shed a small world of our own. The air was cool, the window fogging slightly, and I could smell the damp wood of the walls, the faint tang of the paste. Thomas paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked at me. "Did you always want to be a knight?" he asked, his voice barely above the rain. I leaned back, the vambrace in my lap, catching the dim light. "Not always," I admitted, my tone soft. "I wanted to be a baker once, when I was younger than you. Loved the smell of bread, the warmth of the oven." He laughed, a bright sound that cut through the gloom. "You? A baker can't picture it." I smiled, setting the vambrace down. "Didn't last. My father was a soldier, saw a different path for me, but I still need dough when I get the chance." Thomas nodded, his eyes thoughtful, and I wondered what dreams he held, what paths he'd yet to choose. I didn't ask, not yet. Instead, I pointed to a dent on the breastplate, a deep one near the shoulder. "This," I said, tracing it with my finger, "came from a lance in a tournament. Thought I'd never breathe again." His eyes widened, and he leaned closer, the rag forgotten in his hand. I told him the story briefly, softly of the dusty field, the roar of the crowd, the moment of impact. No glory, just the ache and the recovery. He listened, then shared a tale of his own, about the time he'd dropped a sack of flour in the mill, covering himself and his father in white dust. "Looked like ghosts," he said, grinning. Da laughed, but I had to sweep for hours. I chuckled, picturing it, and we returned to our work, the story settling between us like the rain outside. The armor was taking shape now, its surface smoother, reflecting the faint light. My hands moved steadily, the cloth warm from use, and I felt a rhythm in the task, a meditation. Thomas matched my pace, his movements surer, and I saw the care he put into it, not just for the armor, but for this moment we shared. The rain eased as the morning wore on, the patter softening to a drizzle. We finished the breastplate, setting it aside, and moved to the smaller pieces. I showed him how to oil the joints, how to check for cracks. His fingers were quick, learning the metal's secrets, and I let him take the lead, watching as he worked. The shed was warmer now, our breath visible in the cool air, and I felt a contentment I hadn't known in years. This was no battlefield, no castle hall, but it was enough more than enough. The armor gleamed, a testament to our morning's labor, and I clapped Thomas on the back, my hand lingering for a moment. We stepped outside when we were done, the air fresh and sharp, the village glistening under a thin veil of mist. The armor was packed away, safe from the damp, and Thomas stretched, his tunic damp at the shoulders. "Feels good," he said, looking at the shed, then at me. "Making something better." You know, I nodded, feeling the truth of his words. "It does, lad, it does." We parted then, him to the mill, me to the inn, the rain a soft whisper as I walked. The village was quiet, the clouds parting to show patches of sky, and I carried the morning with me, its warmth lingering in my chest. The forest beyond Eldermoor was calling today, its edges touched by the golden haze of late morning. I'd woken to bird song, the kind that weaves through your thoughts and pulls you gently from sleep. The inn's wooden floor creaked under my boots as I dressed, my tunic soft from years of wear, my cloak slung over one shoulder. Thomas was waiting outside, leaning against a fence post, his breath fogging in the cool air. He'd brought a small sack bread and apples, he said, for the walk. His eyes were bright, eager, and I felt a familiar warmth, the kind that comes from knowing someone's glad to see you. "Ready for a lesson?" lad, I asked, adjusting my belt. The weight of my dagger, a quiet comfort. He nodded, falling into step beside me, his stride trying to match mine. We left the village behind, the path winding past fields where sheep grazed, their woolly backs dusted with dew. The forest loomed ahead, its trees tall and ancient, their leaves a mix of green and early autumn gold. The air smelled of moss and pine, and the ground was soft, cushioning our steps. I wanted to teach Thomas something different today, not swordplay or armor, but the heart of what it meant to be a knight, the code of honor, the unspoken rules that guided me through years of wandering. It wasn't something I could show with a blade or a shield. It needed the quiet of the woods, the space to think and speak. We walked deeper, the forest closing around us like a living cathedral. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, dappling the path, and the sound of a distant stream murmured in the background. I slowed my pace, letting Thomas take in the stillness, the way the air seemed to hold its breath. "A knight's strength isn't just in his arm," I said, my voice low, blending with the rustle of leaves. "It's in his choices. Honor binds us, lad, honor to others, to ourselves." He glanced at me, his brow furrowed, and I saw he was listening, really listening, not just nodding to please me. I stopped by a fallen log, its surface mossy and cool, and gestured for him to sit. He did, setting the sack between us, and I settled beside him, my hands resting on my knees. The forest was alive, birds flitting overhead, the soft scurry of a squirrel, but it felt like we were alone, wrapped in a moment meant just for us. Honor's simple, I continued, picking up a leaf, its edges curling. It's doing what's right, even when no one's watching. It's keeping your word, protecting those who can't protect themselves. I turned the leaf in my fingers, its texture rough, and handed it to him. He took it, his eyes thoughtful. I told him a story then, one I hadn't shared before. Years ago, in a village not unlike Eldermore, I'd come across a merchant cheating a widow out of her coin. The man was loud, his purse heavy, and no one dared challenge him. I could have walked away. My purse was light, my road long, but I didn't. I confronted him, not with a sword, but with words, calm and firm, until he returned her money. Didn't feel like a victory, I said, my voice soft. But it was right. Thomas nodded, his fingers tracing the leaf's veins, and I saw the weight of my words settle in him. He was quiet for a moment, then spoke, his voice hesitant. Last year, I found a coin in the mill. Wasn't mine, but I kept it. Felt bad after. He looked down, his cheeks flushing. I rested a hand on his shoulder, the gesture gentle. You feel bad because you've got a heart, lad. Next time, you'll choose different. That's honor too, learning. He met my gaze, his eyes searching, and I smiled, letting him see I meant it. The forest seemed to hum with approval, the stream's song a little clearer. We opened the sack, sharing the bread and apples. The bread was crusty, the apples tart, and we ate slowly, the flavors grounding us. I pointed out a bird, a finch, its wings a flash of red, and told him how my father used to name every bird we saw on our walks. Thomas grinned, saying his sister did the same, always chattering about sparrows and wrens. The memory made him laugh, a soft sound that echoed in the trees, and I felt the distance between us shrink, our stories weaving together like roots beneath the earth. I spoke more of the code, how it meant loyalty, not just to a lord, but to those you cared for, how it meant humility, admitting when you're wrong. I didn't lecture, didn't raise my voice. I let the words flow, steady and calm, like the stream nearby. Thomas listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes asking questions in a voice so quiet it barely stirred the air. What if you don't know what's right? He asked once, his eyes on the leaf in his hand. I leaned back, the log cool against my spine. You listen to your heart, lad. It's usually wiser than your head. The sun climbed higher, warming the forest, and we walked again, following the path as it curved toward the stream. Its water was clear, rippling over smooth stones, and we paused to refill our water skin, the cold biting our fingers. I showed him how to cup his hands to drink, the way I'd done as a boy, and he copied me, splashing himself and laughing. The sound was bright, carefree, and I joined him, my chuckle low and warm. The forest held us, its silence a kind of embrace, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. As we turned back toward the village, the light softening to afternoon gold, I asked Thomas what honor meant to him. He thought for a moment, his steps slow. Helping people, he said finally, like you helped me, with the sword, with everything. His voice was earnest, and I felt a lump in my throat. You're already on the path, lad, I said, my hand brushing his shoulder. We walked in silence after that, the forest fading behind us, the village coming into view. The lesson wasn't over. It never would be, but today, in the quiet of the woods, we'd planted something strong, something true. The afternoon sun was high when I met Thomas outside the inn, its warmth cutting through the autumn chill. I'd spent the morning mending a tear in my cloak, the needle's rhythm soothing, but now I craved open air, a place to breathe and talk. Thomas was there, leaning against a post, his tunic flecked with mill dust, his eyes bright with that quiet eagerness I'd come to know. Fancy a walk, lad, I asked, slinging a small sack over my shoulders water, a bit of bread, nothing heavy. He nodded, falling into step beside me, his boots scuffing the dirt path. The village hummed softly, carts rattling, voices calling, but we left it behind, heading toward a spot I'd seen days ago, an old oak, massive and solitary, standing in a field just beyond Eldermore. The path was gentle, winding past hedgerows where sparrows flitted, their chirps a soft counterpoint to our steps. The air smelled of grass and distant wood smoke, and I let my shoulders loosen, my breath sinking with the rhythm of the walk. Thomas was quiet at first, his hands in his pockets, but I could sense his curiosity, the way he glanced at me, waiting for the day's purpose. I didn't rush to fill the silence sometimes. The best lessons come when you let the world speak first. The oak came into view, its branches sprawling like an embrace, its leaves a mix of green and gold, rustling in the breeze. It was a giant, older than the village, older than memory, and I felt a pull toward it, a need to sit in its shade. We reached the tree, its trunk wide enough to shelter us both, and I spread my cloak on the grass, gesturing for Thomas to sit. He did, cross-legged, his back against the bark, and I settled beside him, the ground cool through my tunic. The sack rested between us, unopened for now, and I leaned back, letting the oak's presence wrap around me. Its shade was deep, the sunlight filtering through in soft patches, and the air carried the faint sweetness of fallen leaves. "This is a good place," I said, my voice low, almost a murmur, "a place for stories." Thomas nodded, his eyes on the horizon where fields stretched toward distant hills. I started with a memory, one that felt right for this moment. When I was a boy, no older than Thomas, I'd had a friend, a shepherd's son, wiry and quick to laugh. We'd spend summers under a tree much like this one, dreaming of adventures, of becoming knights or explorers. We'd lie there, I said, my hands tracing the grass, making up tales of dragons and hidden kingdoms. Never cared if they were true, just that they were ours. The memory was vivid, the scratch of grass, the heat of the sun, the way my friend's laughter echoed. I looked at Thomas, saw him listening, his face soft with thought, and I wondered what dreams he carried. He took the cue, his voice hesitant at first. "Me and my sister, we used to play by the river," he said, picking at a blade of grass. "She'd pretend she was a queen, make me her guard. I'd have to salute and everything." He grinned, a flash of teeth, and I chuckled, picturing him bowing to a little girl with flowers in her hair. "Sounds like you were a fine guard," I said, and he ducked his head, pleased. The oak's leaves whispered above us, a gentle sound, and I felt the moment settle, like a stone sinking into still water. This wasn't training, not in the way of swords or armor, but it was building something trust, a bridge between us. We opened the sack, sharing the bread, its crust breaking softly in our hands. The water was cool, passed back and forth, and we ate slowly. The act as much a ritual as the stories. I told him about my first journey as a squire, how I'd been so nervous I'd forgotten my own name when meeting a lord. Stood there stammering, I said, my voice warm with the memory. Thought I'd be sent home in disgrace. Thomas laughed, crumbs on his tunic, and shared his own tale of the time he'd tried to impress a girl at a village fair and ended up spilling cider down his front. She laughed harder than I did, he admitted, and I joined him. The sound blending with the breeze. The stories flowed, each one a thread, weaving us closer. I spoke of my mother, how she'd sing to me under the stars, her voice soft as a lullaby. Thomas told of his father, gruff but kind, who'd taught him to carve wood by firelight. The oak stood sentinel, its shade a haven, and I felt time slow, the world narrowing to this field, this tree, this boy. The sun shifted, lengthening the shadows, and I noticed Thomas's eyes, The way they held a mix of wonder and something deeper, a longing to be known. I recognized it. I'd felt it too. At his age, sitting under a tree with a friend long gone. I didn't push, didn't ask for more than he offered. Instead, I pointed to a cloud drifting above, its edges glowing. "Looks like a ship," I said, and he squinted, tilting his head. "More like a horse," he countered, and we spent a moment naming shapes, our voices soft, playful. The grass was cool under my fingers, the air warm with the day's heat, and I let myself sink into the simplicity of it. This was what I'd wanted for him today, not a lesson in honor or skill, but a chance to dream, to share the pieces of himself he kept tucked away. As the afternoon waned, the light turning golden, we rose, brushing grass from our clothes. The oak seemed to watch us go, its branches swaying gently. I folded my cloak, slinging the sack over my shoulder, and we started back, the path familiar now. Thomas was quieter, but it was a comfortable quiet, the kind that comes when words have done their work. The village came into view, its chimneys puffing smoke, and I felt a contentment I couldn't name. "Good day, lad," I said as we neared the mill, my hand brushing his shoulder. He nodded, his smile small but real. "Sir Alric." It was. He turned down the path, and I watched him go, the oak shade lingering in my heart. The morning was bright, the kind of day where the air feels clean and the world seems to stretch a little wider. I'd risen early, the inn's quiet creaks and the scent of fresh bread pulling me from sleep. My horse, a sturdy bay named Rowan, needed tending, and I'd promised Thomas he could help. I found him by the stable, already there, stroking Rowan's muzzle with a cautious hand. His tunic was clean, his hair damp as if he'd splashed water on his face, and he grinned when he saw me. "Morning, Sir Ulrich," he said, his voice light, carrying the energy of the day. I nodded, clapping his shoulder. "Let's see to the horses. Lad, they've earned a bit of care." We led Rowan and Thomas's borrowed mare, a gentle gray named Mist, to a stream just outside the village. The path was soft with dew, the grass brushing our boots, and the air smelled of earth and wild mint. The stream ran clear, its surface catching the sunlight in flashes of silver, and the sound of its flow was a steady murmur, like a lullaby for the soul. I knelt by the bank, filling a bucket, and Thomas did the same, his movements careful but eager. Rowan snorted, tossing his head, and I laughed softly, patting his flank. "Easy, old friend," I murmured, feeling the warmth of his coat under my palm. We started with grooming, brushing down the horses' coats until they gleamed. I showed Thomas how to use the curry comb, working in circles to loosen dirt, my hands guiding his at first. "Gentle but firm," I said, my voice low, blending with the stream's song. He nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration, and soon he was brushing Mist on his own, her gray coat shining like moonlight. The horses stood patiently, their tails swishing, and I felt a rhythm settle over us, the kind that comes from simple work done together. The sun warmed my back, the breeze cool on my face, and I let myself sink into the moment. The world narrowing to this stream, these horses, this boy. I told him about Rowan as we worked, how I'd found him as a colt, half-starved in a trader's pen. "Looked at me with those big eyes," I said, running the brush along Rowan's flank. "Knew he was mine." Thomas smiled, his hand steady on Mist. "She's my Dawes," he said, patting her neck. "But she likes me best, follows me like a dog sometimes." I chuckled, picturing it, and the sound felt easy, natural. The stream bubbled beside us, its pebbles smooth and colorful under the water, and I noticed Thomas glancing at them, his eyes catching their shine. I didn't comment, just kept brushing, letting him have his thoughts. We moved to the hooves next, checking for stones. I showed him how to lift Rowan's leg, how to clean the hoof with a pick, careful not to startle him. Thomas watched closely, then tried it on Mist, his hands tentative but sure. "Good," I said, nodding as he worked. "You've got the touch." He flushed, pleased, and I saw the pride in his eyes, the kind that comes from doing something well. The horses were calm, their breathing slow, and I felt a bond growing not just between me and Thomas, but between us and the animals, a quiet trust built in the morning's light. We paused to let the horses drink, their muzzles dipping into the stream, the water rippling around them. I sat on a flat rock, Thomas beside me, and we shared a moment of silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. The air was warm now, the mint scent stronger, and I could hear bees buzzing in the clover nearby. I told him a story, one from my early days as a knight, about the time Rowan had carried me through a flooded river, his strength keeping us both safe. "Horses know more than we do sometimes," I said, my voice soft. "Trust them." Thomas nodded, his eyes on Mist, and I wondered what he saw in her steady gaze. He shared a tale of his own, about riding Mist to a neighboring village last summer, racing his cousin across a field. "Thought I'd fall off," he admitted, grinning, but she knew the way. I smiled, hearing the affection in his voice, and we fell quiet again, the stream's flow wrapping us in its gentle rhythm. The horses finished drinking, and we led them to a patch of grass to graze, their teeth tearing softly at the blades. I showed Thomas how to check their saddles, how to feel for worn leather, and he listened, his hands quick to learn, his questions thoughtful. The morning stretched on, the sun climbing higher, and we finished by walking the horses back to the stable, their coats gleaming, their steps light. The village was waking fully now, voices carrying from the market, but I felt apart from it, still caught in the stream's spell. Thomas was quieter too, but his smile was steady, and I knew he felt at the peace of our work, the bond it strengthened. "They look good," he said, patting Mist's neck as we tethered them. I nodded, resting a hand on Rowan's shoulder. "They do, lad. Thanks to you." We parted then, him to the mill, me to the inn, the stable's wooden walls warm in the sunlight. The stream's song lingered in my mind, its cool clarity a reminder of the morning's calm. I walked slowly, my boots steady on the path, the air sweet with grass and mint. This wasn't a grand moment, not the stuff of ballads, but it was hours a morning by the stream, tending horses, building something that would last. I glanced back once, seeing Thomas's figure disappear around a bend, and felt a warmth in my chest, soft and sure, like the sun's touch on my skin. The night was clear, the kind where the sky feels like a vast, open hand, sprinkled with stars that seem close enough to touch. I'd spent the evening at the inn, sipping ale by the hearth, the fire's crackle blending with the low hum of voices. But the room felt close, the air heavy with smoke, and I needed to breathe, to feel the world's quiet. I'd asked Thomas to meet me outside the village, near a hill where the grass was soft and the view unbroken. My cloak was warm around my shoulders as I walked, my boots whispering on the path, the scent of damp earth and hay rising with each step. The village lights faded behind me, and I felt my chest loosen, the night's stillness a balm. Thomas was already there when I reached the hill, a small figure silhouetted against the starlit sky. He was sitting on a blanket he'd brought, his knees drawn up, his breath visible in the cool air. "Sir Alric," he said, his voice soft, almost reverent, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the night. I settled beside him, the grass cool through my cloak, and leaned back on my hands, letting the hill cradle me. The stars were brilliant, a tapestry of silver and blue, and the air smelled of clover and distant pine. "Good spot, lad," I murmured, and he nodded, his eyes fixed upward, a faint smile tugging at his lips. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that feels full, not empty. The night was alive, crickets chirping, an owl's low call, the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze, but it was a soft life, one that soothed rather than stirred. I let my gaze wander the sky, picking out constellations I'd learned as a boy. The hunter, the crown, the serpent names my father had taught me, pointing with a calloused finger. I glanced at Thomas, saw the wonder in his face, and felt a pull to share something deeper, something that would bind us in this moment. "Ever make a promise under the stars?" I asked, my voice low, blending with the night. He turned to me, his eyes catching the starlight, and shook his head. "Not really," he said, his tone curious. "What kind?" I leaned back, the grass tickling my palms, and took a slow breath. "The kind that matters, not to a lord or a crowd, but to someone you trust." I paused, feeling the weight of my own words, then continued. "I want to make one now. Thomas, to you." His eyes widened, but he didn't speak, just waited. His breath held. I sat up, facing him, my hands resting on my knees. "I promise to teach you true," I said, my voice steady, each word deliberate, not just swords or honor, but what it means to live well, to be a man worth following. "And I promise to stand by you, as long as you'll have me." The words felt like stones, solid and heavy, settling into the earth between us. Thomas stared, his mouth slightly open, and I saw the flicker of emotion in his eyes, surprise, gratitude, maybe a touch of fear. He swallowed, then nodded, his voice barely a whisper. I promise to, Sir Ulrich, to learn, to try my best, to stand by you." The stars seemed to brighten, as if sealing our words, and I felt a warmth in my chest, soft but unshakable. We didn't need more words for a moment. The promise was enough, a thread tying us closer. I leaned back again, my shoulder brushing his, and pointed to a cluster of stars. "That's the Archer," I said, tracing its shape with my finger. "My mother said it guards the night, keeps the dark from growing too heavy." Thomas followed my gaze, his head tilting. "My Da says stars are lanterns, hung by giants long ago." He smiled, shy but warm, and I chuckled, the sound low and easy. We traded stories then, small ones that fit the night. I told him about a time I'd camped under a sky like this, after a long ride, my horse snoring beside me. The memory was vivid, the crackle of my fire, the ache in my bones, the stars so close I felt I could pluck them. Thomas listened, his knees hugged to his chest, then shared his own tale about sneaking onto the mill's roof as a child, counting stars until he fell asleep. "Woke up freezing," he said, laughing softly. "But I'd do it again." I nodded, picturing him, a boy chasing wonder, and felt a pang of affection. The night deepened, the air growing colder, but we stayed, wrapped in the blanket and our shared warmth. I spoke of my first squire's oath, years ago, how I'd stammered through it, my hands shaking. Thomas grinned, admitting he'd practiced his words to me in his head before speaking. "Didn't want to mess it up," he said, and I rested a hand on his shoulder, letting him know he hadn't. The stars kept their watch, the hill a quiet sanctuary, and I felt time slow, each moment a gift, like the last sip of cider in a cup. We fell quiet again, the night sounds filling the space crickets, wind, the distant bark of a dog. I noticed Thomas's eyes growing heavy, his yawns coming more often, and I smiled. "Time to head back." "Lad," I said, my voice a murmur. He nodded, reluctant, and we folded the blanket, the grass damp under our boots. The walk to the village was slow, the path lit by starlight, the air sharp with night's chill. At the mill, he turned, his face soft in the dim light. "Thank you, Sir Ulrich," he said, and I nodded, my throat tight, Sleep well, Thomas?" I watched him go, then turn back to the inn, the stars still bright above. The promise lingered, a weight I carried gladly, and I felt the night's peace settle over me, like a cloak against the cold. The village was silent, its windows dark, and I walked with steady steps, the hill's memory a warmth in my heart, a vow sealed under the endless sky. The morning carried a bite, the kind of chill that nips at your fingers and makes your breath puff in the air. I'd woken to the inn's familiar creaks, the scent of wood smoke drifting through the window, and decided today was for something different. Thomas and I had planned to visit the blacksmith, a man whose forge was the heart of Eldermore's bustle. I pulled on my tunic, the wool soft and warm, and slung my cloak over my shoulders, its weight a comfort. Thomas was waiting outside, his cheeks red from the cold, his hands tucked into his sleeves. "Ready?" "Sir Alric?" he asked, his voice bright despite the gray sky. I nodded, gesturing toward the village square. "Let's see what the forge has for us." "Lad." The path to the blacksmith's was alive with the village's morning rhythm, carts creaking, hens clucking, a child's laughter ringing out. The air smelled of damp earth and baking bread, and I let the sounds wrap around me, my steps steady beside Thomas's quicker ones. The forge stood at the square's edge, its stone walls blackened by years of soot, its chimney puffing thick smoke. The clang of hammer on anvil greeted us before we saw the blacksmith, a broad man with arms like tree trunks, his apron stained with ash. He looked up as we approached, wiping sweat from his brow, and gave a nod. "Sir Alric," he rumbled, his voice deep as the forge's bellows, "and the miller's boy, come to watch the sparks." I smiled, resting a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Something like that? Godwin. Mind if we sit a spell?" He waved us in, pointing to a bench by the forge's open side, where the heat rolled out in waves. We settled there, the bench hard but warm, and I felt the forge's pulse, its fire a living thing. Thomas's eyes were wide, tracking the blacksmith's movements, lifting a glowing iron from the coals, hammering it into shape, sparks flying like tiny stars. The air was thick with the tang of hot metal and charcoal, and I breathed it in, the scent stirring memories of my own days learning a knight's trade. Godwin worked with a rhythm, his hammer falling in steady beats, and I leaned toward Thomas, my voice low to carry over the clang. "Watch his hands," I said. "He knows the metal, feels its temper. That's a craft, lad, like any we learn." Thomas nodded, his gaze fixed, and I saw the fascination in him, the same hunger I'd felt watching my father sharpen a blade. I let him watch a while, the forge's glow painting his face in shades of orange and gold, and felt a quiet pride. This wasn't a lesson in swords or honor, but in the beauty of work, the way a man's hands could shape something lasting. I spoke softly, sharing a memory. "First time I saw a forge, I was younger than you," I said, my eyes on the fire. "Thought the smith was a wizard, turning iron to swords." Thomas grinned, his shoulder brushing mine. "Still looks like magic," he murmured, and I chuckled, the sound swallowed by the hammer's song. He told me then, his voice shy, about helping his father mend a millstone once, how the stone's weight had scared him, but he'd felt strong after. "Wasn't magic," he said, "but it felt big." I nodded, understanding, and rested a hand on the bench, the wood warm under my palm. Godwin paused to quench a blade, steam hissing as the iron met water, and the air grew sharp with the smell of scorched metal. He glanced at us, his eyes crinkling. "You two dreaming of swords?" he asked, and Thomas flushed, shaking his head. I answered for him, my tone light. "Just dreaming, Godwin. The lad's got hopes aplenty." The blacksmith laughed, a deep rumble, and returned to his work, the hammer falling again. Thomas looked at me, his expression soft, and I saw he was thinking, turning our words over like stones in a stream. We stayed through the morning, the forge a world of its own. I told Thomas about the first sword I'd held, its balance wrong for my young hands, but how I'd carried it like a treasure. He shared a hope, his voice barely above the forge's roar, that one day he'd make something. Not a sword, but something useful, like a plow or a hinge. Something folks need, he said, and I felt a warmth in my chest, his words so earnest they seemed to glow like the coals. The air was hot now, the bench creaking under us, and I let the moment settle, the sparks and hammer a backdrop to our quiet talk. Godwin offered us a closer look, calling Thomas to the anvil. "Hold this," he said, handing him a pair of tongs gripping a small iron rod. Thomas took them, his hands steady despite the heat, and followed Godwin's instructions, turning the rod in the fire. I watched, my heart full, seeing the care in his movements, the way he listened. The blacksmith nodded approval, and Thomas returned to the bench, his face flushed with pride. "Not so hard," he said, and I smiled, clapping his back. "You've got a knack, lad." The sun was high when we left, the forge's heat lingering on our skin. The village square was busy now, merchants calling, children chasing a hoop. We walked slowly, the air cooler outside the forge, smelling of straw and apples. Thomas was quieter, but his steps were light, and I knew the morning had meant something to him, as it had to me. "Good day," I said as we neared the mill, my voice soft. He nodded, his smile small but real. "Aye, Sir Alric. Thanks." He turned down the path, and I headed to the inn, the forge's sparks still dancing in my mind, a reminder of hopes shared in the fire's glow. The dawn was crisp, a thin layer of frost sparkling on the village rooftops as I stepped out of the inn. My breath puffed in the air, and I pulled my cloak tighter, the wool warm against the morning's chill. The sky was pale, streaked with pink, and the world felt hushed, as if Eldermore were still dreaming. I'd told Thomas to meet me early, before the village fully woke, for a ride through the fields. My horse, Rowan, was saddled, his coat steaming slightly in the cold, and Thomas's mare, Mist, stood ready nearby. He arrived, his tunic layered with a thick scarf, his eyes bright despite the early hour. "Morning, Sir Alric," he said, his voice muffled by the scarf. I nodded, checking Rowan's girth. "Ready for a cold one, lad?" We mounted and rode out, the village fading behind us as the path opened into frost-kissed fields. The ground crunched under the horses' hooves, the air sharp with the scent of frozen grass and distant wood smoke. I kept Rowan at a walk, letting Thomas settle into Mist's rhythm, his hands light on the reins. The field stretched wide, bordered by low stone walls, and the hills beyond glowed in the rising sun. I breathed deeply, feeling the cold bite my lungs, and let the quiet of the morning wrap around us. This wasn't a day for lessons or work, but for the simple joy of riding, of sharing the world's beauty with a friend. The frost sparkled like scattered jewels, catching the light as we rode. I glanced at Thomas, saw his cheeks red, his scarf slipping to show a grin. "Feels like winter's knocking," I said, my voice low, carrying over the soft clop of hooves. He nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "Da says it'll snow soon. Always does after a frost like this." I smiled, remembering winters past, the way snow turned the world soft and still. We rode in silence for a while, the horse's breath steaming, the fields a canvas of silver and gold. I felt my shoulders loosen, the rhythm of Rowan's gait a steady pulse, grounding me. We followed a path toward a copse of trees, their branches bare, etched against the sky. The air was colder here, the frost thicker, and I slowed Rowan, letting Thomas draw alongside. "Ever ride out just to see the world?" I asked, my tone soft, inviting. He tilted his head, thinking, not really, mostly to the market or back, but this. He gestured to the fields, the frost, the sky. This is better? I nodded, feeling his words settle, a shared truth. I told him then, my voice blending with the morning's hush, about a ride I'd taken years ago, through a valley where the mist hung low, making the world feel like a dream. Felt like I was the only soul alive, I said, and Thomas listened, his eyes wide, picturing it. He shared a memory of his own, his voice shy but clear. Last winter, I took Mist out after a snow. Everything was quiet, like the world was holding its breath. He paused, smiling, fell off once, but she waited for me. I chuckled, picturing him sprawled in the snow, Mist's patient gaze. She's a good one, I said, and he nodded, patting her neck. The horses moved easily, their steps sure despite the frost, and I felt a warmth in my chest, the kind that comes from moments like these, simple, unhurried, shared. We reached the copse, dismounting to let the horses graze on what grass peeked through the frost. I spread my cloak on the ground, and we sat, the cold seeping through but not unwelcome. The air smelled of pine and earth, and the trees stood like sentinels, their shadows long across the field. I pulled a small flask of warmed cider from my pack, passing it to Thomas. He sipped, his eyes closing briefly at the warmth, and handed it back. Tastes like home, he said, and I smiled, taking a sip myself. The spices soft on my tongue. We sat there, watching the sun climb, the frost beginning to melt in its light. I spoke of riding as a boy, how my father would take me through fields like these, teaching me to feel the horse, not just guide it. It's a partnership, I said, my hand resting on the cloak. You listen. They listen. Thomas nodded, his fingers tracing a frost pattern on the ground. He told me about his first ride on Mist, how he'd been scared but pretended he wasn't, for his father's sake. Kept thinking I'd fall. He admitted, grinning, didn't, though. I clapped his shoulder, my hand lingering. You're steadier than you think, lad. The morning warmed, the frost fading, and we mounted again, riding back toward the village. The fields were golden now, the sun higher, and I let Rowan stretch into a gentle trot, Thomas keeping pace. The wind was light, carrying the scent of hay and distant fires, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. We didn't speak much, but we didn't need to. The ride, the frost, the shared cider had said enough. As the village came into view, its chimneys puffing smoke, I slowed Rowan, glancing at Thomas. Good ride, I said, my voice warm. He nodded, his scarf loose now, his smile bright. Aye, Sir Alric, the best. We parted at the stable, him leading Miss to her stall, me guiding Rowan to his. The village was waking fully, the market's hum rising, but I carried the morning's quiet with me, its frost and light a memory to hold. I walked to the inn, my boots steady, the air still sharp with the promise of winter. This was no grand tale, but it was ours a ride through frosty fields, a moment of friendship that felt as eternal as the hills. The afternoon sun hung low, casting a golden glow over the fields as I walked with Thomas along a dusty path outside Eldermore. The air was warm, carrying the scent of dry grass and wildflowers, and the hum of bees filled the silence. My cloak was slung over one arm, my tunic loose, the day too gentle for extra weight. Thomas had a stick in his hand, swinging it idly, his steps light despite the mill dust on his boots. We'd planned to spend the day wandering, no lessons, no tasks. But fate had other ideas. As we rounded a bend, we saw him a traveler, older than me, his cloak tattered, his face lined with exhaustion. He was slumped by a broken cart, its wheel cracked, his donkey nibbling grass nearby. I slowed, resting a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Looks like he needs help," I said, my voice low, calm. Thomas nodded, his eyes taking in the scene: the man's slumped shoulders, the cart's tilt, the scattered bundles of cloth and pots. We approached, my boots soft on the path, and the man looked up, his eyes wary but tired. "Good day," I said, keeping my tone gentle, like approaching a skittish horse. "Trouble with the cart," he sighed, rubbing his neck. "Wheel gave out. Been stuck since noon." His voice was rough, worn by the road, and I saw the weight of his journey in the lines of his face. I knelt by the cart, running my hand over the wheel's splintered rim. "Fixable," I said, glancing at Thomas. "What do you think, lad?" He crouched beside me, his fingers tracing the crack, his brow furrowed. "Needs a new spoke, maybe," he said, hesitant but thoughtful. I nodded, pleased with his eye. "Good. Let's see what we can do." The traveler watched us, his wariness softening, and I offered a small smile. "We'll have you moving soon, friend. Rest a bit." He nodded, easing back against a tree, his donkey snorting softly. Thomas and I set to work, the sun warm on our backs. I sent him to gather sturdy branches from a nearby thicket, his steps quick as he disappeared into the green. The air smelled of sap and earth, and I used the time to clear the cart's load, stacking the man's goods carefully: cloth, a few tools, a sack of grain. Thomas returned with an armful of branches, his tunic snagged with burrs, and we sorted through them, finding one thick enough to serve as a temporary spoke. "Like this?" he asked, holding it up, and I nodded, clapping his shoulder. "Exactly, lad. Now, let's carve it down." I pulled my dagger, its blade worn but sharp, and showed Thomas how to whittle the branch, peeling away bark in smooth strips. He took the knife, his hands careful, the wood curling under his touch. The traveler watched, his eyes following our movements, and I felt his trust grow. A quiet shift in the air. The sun moved lower, painting the fields in hues of amber, and the work became a rhythm: whittle, test, adjust. Thomas's hands steadied, his focus sharp, and I let him take the lead, my voice soft with guidance. "Keep the cuts even," I murmured. "Let the wood tell you its shape." We fitted the new spoke, hammering it into place with a stone, the cart creaking as it settled. Sweat beaded on Thomas's brow. But he didn't falter, his hands sure now. The branch transformed into something useful. I tied the wheel with a strip of leather from my pack, tightening it to hold the repair. The traveler stood, brushing dirt from his cloak, and tested the cart, pushing it gently. It rolled, not perfect but steady, and his face broke into a smile, weary but genuine. "You've done me a kindness," he said, his voice thick. "More than I can repay." I waved a hand, rising to my feet. "No need for repayment," I said. "Safe travels, friend." Thomas stood beside me, wiping his hands on his tunic, his chest puffed slightly with pride. The man offered us an apple from his sack, its skin red and glossy, and we accepted, splitting it between us. The fruit was sweet, crisp, and we ate as he hitched his donkey, the cart rattling softly as he started down the path. He raised a hand in farewell, and we watched him go, the field swallowing his figure, the sun dipping toward the horizon. Thomas and I sat by the path, the grass soft under us, the apple's juice still on my fingers. The air was cooler now, the sky streaked with pink and gold, and I felt a peace settle over me, the kind that comes from doing something right. "Felt good," Thomas said, his voice quiet, his eyes on the path, helping him. I nodded, leaning back on my hands, the earth solid beneath me. "That's what it's about, lad. Not glory, not coin, just making someone's road a bit easier." He smiled, small but real, and I saw the lesson take root, deeper than any sword drill. We stayed there a while, the world quieting as dusk crept in. I told him about another time I'd helped a stranger, a farmer whose barn had caught fire, how the village came together to save his livestock. The memory was warm, the glow of that long ago fire in my mind. And Thomas listened, his knees drawn up, his face soft in the fading light. He shared a story of his own, about helping a neighbor mend a fence after a storm, how his hands had blistered, but he'd felt proud. Da said I did good, he said, and I rested a hand on his shoulder, letting him know I thought so too. The stars were peeking out as we walked back, the path familiar, the village lights glowing in the distance. The air smelled of night now, cool and clean, and our steps were slow, unhurried. I felt the day's work in my muscles, a good ache, and knew Thomas did too. At the mill, he turned, his face half lit by a lantern's glow. "Thanks, Sir Ulrich," he said, his voice earnest. I nodded, my throat tight. "Well done, lad." He slipped inside, and I headed to the inn, the dusk wrapping around me, the memory of our kindness a light to carry into the night. The morning was soft, with a mist hanging low over Eldermoor, cloaking the village in a quiet veil. I woke to the gentle drip of dew from the inn's eaves, the air cool and damp through my open window. Today felt different, inward, as if the world was inviting stillness. I'd told Thomas to meet me at the small chapel on the village's edge, a stone building older than most, its walls weathered but warm with history. My tunic was clean, my cloak left behind for once, and I walked with a slow step, my boots muffled on the cobblestones. The village was waking bakers kneading dough, a dog barking faintly, but the mist kept it all distant, like a dream half remembered. Thomas was there when I arrived, standing by the chapel's wooden door, his hands clasped, his tunic damp from the mist. His eyes were quiet, thoughtful, and he gave a small nod. "Morning, Sir Ulrich," he said, his voice low, matching the hush of the day. I rested a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in him, the weight of a place like this. "Morning, lad. Let's find some peace." The door creaked as I pushed it open, the air inside cool, smelling of wax and old stone. The chapel was small, its windows narrow, letting in slants of pale light that danced on the floor. A few candles flickered on a simple altar, their glow soft, like a whispered prayer. We stepped inside, our footsteps echoing faintly, and I gestured to a wooden pew near the front. Thomas sat, his hands on his knees, and I settled beside him, the wood smooth under my palms. The silence was deep, not empty but full, like the pause before a song. I let it hold us, my breath slowing, my shoulders easing, the mist outside pressed against the windows, softening the world. And I felt a pull to share this moment, to let Thomas feel the quiet strength of a place meant for reflection. "No swords today," I murmured, my voice barely stirring the air. "Just us. And this." I bowed my head, not in formal prayer, but in a kind of listening, letting the chapel's stillness speak. Thomas followed, his movements hesitant, as if unsure of the ritual. I didn't guide him, didn't need to. This was about feeling, not doing. The candles flickered, their light warm against the stone, and I thought of the times I'd sought places like this, after long roads or heavy days, when the world felt too loud. My heart slowed, each beat a soft drum, and I let my mind drift, not to grand thoughts but to simple ones, the scent of the wax, the coolness of the pew, the boy beside me. I spoke after a while, my voice a whisper, meant only for him. "When I was your age, I'd sit in a chapel like this with my mother. She'd say it was a place to find your heart again." Thomas glanced at me, his eyes soft, and nodded. "My ma takes us here sometimes," he said, his voice just as quiet. "Says it's where you talk to what's bigger than you." I smiled, feeling the truth of his words, the way they echoed my own. The mist outside seemed to thicken, wrapping the chapel tighter, and I let the silence return, a gentle tide washing over us. We stayed like that, heads bowed, the candles our only company. I didn't pray in words, but in images my mother's face, the fields of my childhood, the steady trust in Thomas's eyes. I wondered what he saw in his own quiet, what hopes or fears he carried. I didn't ask, didn't need to know yet. The chapel held us both, its stones carrying centuries of whispered prayers, and I felt a connection, not just to Thomas, but to all who'd sat here before, seeking the same peace. The air was cool, the wax's scent grounding, and my breath came easier, like a knot untying. Thomas shifted, his hands relaxing, and I sensed he was finding his own calm. I spoke again, softer still. No need for words here, lad. Just let yourself be. He nodded, his eyes on the candles, their flame steady despite the draft. I told him a memory, one that fit this place how, after my first tournament, I'd sat in a chapel much like this, my hands bruised, my heart heavy with doubt. Didn't know if I was good enough, I admitted, my voice blending with the silence. But sitting there, I found a kind of strength, not for fighting, but for going on. He listened, his face thoughtful, and I saw him turn it over, like a stone smoothed by a river. He shared something then, his voice barely audible. When my ma was sick last year, I came here. Didn't know what to say, but it helped. His words were simple, raw, and I felt a pang, wishing I could carry that weight for him. I rested a hand on his arm, brief but firm, and he met my gaze, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. The candles burned lower, their light softer now, and the mist outside began to lift, letting faint sunlight filter through the windows. The chapel felt alive, its silence a kind of music, and I let it hold us a moment longer, my heart full. We rose eventually, the pew creaking, our steps slow as we moved to the door. The air outside was warmer, the mist thinning to show the village's outlines, roofs, chimneys, the distant mill. Thomas paused, looking back at the chapel, and I saw a calmness in him, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. "Feels different," he said, his voice quiet but sure. I nodded, my hand brushing his shoulder. "It does, lad." We walked back, the cobblestones slick under our boots, the village waking around us. The chapel's peace lingered, a soft glow in my chest, a moment of quiet shared with a friend who was becoming more like family. The market day in Eldermore dawned bright, with a breeze that carried the scent of ripe apples and fresh hay through the village. I woke to the clamor of carts and voices drifting up from the square, the inn's wooden shutters rattling softly. My tunic felt light as I dressed, my cloak left behind for the warmth of the morning. Thomas was waiting by the stable, his eyes sparkling with the promise of the day, his tunic patched but clean. "Market's buzzing already, Sir Alric," he said, bouncing on his toes. I smiled, adjusting my belt. "Let's see what treasures we find, lad." We set off, the path to the square alive with the village's pulse, our steps quick with anticipation. The market was a riot of color and sound stalls draped in red and blue cloth, baskets overflowing with pumpkins, bread, and wool. Merchants called out, their voices mingling with the bleat of goats and the laughter of children weaving through the crowd. The air was thick with the smells of roasted nuts, herbs, and leather, and I felt the energy of it, like a river pulling me along. Thomas was wide-eyed, his head turning to take it all in, and I rested a hand on his shoulder, guiding him through the press of bodies. "Stay close," I said, my voice warm, and he nodded, his grin infectious. We wandered first to a baker's stall, where loaves were stacked high, their crusts golden and crackling. The baker, a woman with flour-dusted hands, offered us a sample, a warm bit of bread that melted on my tongue, its flavor rich with rye. I thanked her, passing a piece to Thomas, who ate with a hum of delight. "Best bread in the village," he said, crumbs on his chin, and I chuckled, brushing them away. We moved on, pausing at a stall with apples, their skins red and glossy. I bought two, tossing one to Thomas, and we bit into them, the juice sweet and sharp, the crunch a small joy in the morning's bustle. The market's rhythm was its own music vendors haggling, a fiddler playing a lively tune, the clink of coins changing hands. I let Thomas lead now, following as he darted to a stall with wooden toys, his fingers tracing a carved horse. "My sister'd love this," he said, his voice soft, and I saw the tenderness in his eyes, the wish to bring her something special. I slipped the vendor a coin, nodding to Thomas to take it, and his face lit up, the toy tucked carefully in his pocket. "For her," he said, and I clapped his shoulder, my heart warm with his kindness. We drifted through the stalls, no hurry, no purpose beyond the moment. A weaver showed us bolts of cloth, their colors deep and soft, and I told Thomas about my mother's loom, how she'd hum as she worked, her hands sure. He listened, then shared how his father once tried to mend a sack with needle and thread, only to tangle it worse. "Ma laughed for days," he said, and I joined him, our laughter blending with the market's hum. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, and I felt the day's lightness, the way it wrapped us in its simple pleasures. At a spice stall, the air was sharp with saffron and cinnamon, and the vendor, an older man with a quick smile, offered us a pinch of dried mint to taste. It was cool on my tongue, and Thomas wrinkled his nose, grinning. "Tastes like tea," he said, and I nodded, remembering long ago cups shared by a fire. We didn't buy, just thanked the man and moved on, our steps slow, the market's colors blurring into a warm tapestry. I noticed Thomas's ease, the way he greeted villagers by name, his place here so clear, and I felt a quiet pride, as if his roots were mine to share. We paused by a juggler, his hands a blur with wooden balls, the crowd clapping as he tossed them higher. Thomas cheered, his voice bright, and I leaned against a post, watching him. The boy who'd become more than a squire. The market was a world of its own, alive with small connections, and I let myself sink into it, the noise and warmth a kind of home. I told Thomas about a market I'd seen years ago, where a dancer spun with ribbons, her movements like a song. He listened, then described a fair where he'd tried archery, missing every shot but laughing all the same. "Kept trying," he said, and I smiled, seeing his heart in the words. The afternoon waned, the sun softening, and we found a bench near the square's edge, sharing a pastry from a vendor, its fillings sweet with honey and nuts. The crumbs fell to the ground, drawing sparrows, and we watched them hop, the market's din fading to a gentle hum. I felt the day's weight, not heavy but full, like a basket brimming with good things. "Good day, lad," I said, my voice low, and Thomas nodded, his eyes on the crowd, his toy horse still safe in his pocket. Sir Alric. Really good." We rose as the market began to quiet, stalls packing up, the fiddler's tune slowing. The walk back was unhurried, the village settling into evening, the air cooler now, smelling of dust and fading flowers. At the mill, Thomas turned, his face soft in the twilight. "Thanks for today," he said, his voice earnest. I nodded, my throat tight. "Anytime, lad." He slipped inside, and I headed to the inn, the market's warmth lingering, a memory of apples and laughter, of a friendship growing stronger with each shared step. The morning was gentle, with a soft warmth that hinted at autumn's peak, the air carrying the scent of ripe grain and distant fires. I'd woken to the inn's familiar creaks, the light through my window, golden and slow. Today was for helping, I had decided Thomas and I had heard of a farmer whose cart had broken near Eldermore's outskirts, and we'd offered to lend a hand. I pulled on my tunic, its fabric worn soft, and tied my belt, the dagger's weight a quiet comfort. Thomas was waiting by the stable, his sleeves rolled up, a smudge of dirt already on his cheek. "Ready to play carpenter, Sir Ulrich?" he asked, his grin bright. I chuckled, nodding. "Let's see what we can fix, lad." We walked to the farmer's field, the path winding past hedgerows where blackberries clung, dark and sweet. The sun was climbing, warming our backs, and the air buzzed with the hum of late bees. The farmer, a wiry man named Hal, was by his cart when we arrived, its axle cracked, its load of hay spilling onto the grass. He wiped his brow, his face lined with worry, and greeted us with a tired nod. "Kind of you to come," he said, his voice rough but grateful. I clapped his shoulder, my tone easy. "We'll have it right. Hal, show us the damage." Thomas knelt by the axle, his eyes sharp, already assessing, and I felt a flicker of pride at his quickness. The cart was old, its wood weathered, but the brake was clean enough to mend. I ran my hand along the axle, feeling the splintered grain, and glanced at Thomas. "What do you think? Lad, brace it or replace it?" He chewed his lip, thinking, "Brace it? Maybe. Got enough wood to hold it." I nodded, impressed. "Good eye. Let's find some timber." Hal pointed us to a pile of scraps nearby oak, sturdy enough for the job, and we set to work, the field a quiet world of our own. The grass was soft under my boots, the air warm with the scent of hay, and I let the task's rhythm take over, my hands steady, my mind clear. Thomas and I sorted the wood, picking out a piece thick enough to splint the axle. I showed him how to measure it, marking the length with a charred stick, my voice low and patient. "Cut it even, or it'll wobble," I said, handing him my dagger. He took it, his hands careful, and sawed slowly, the blade biting into the wood with a soft rasp. The sun was higher now, the field glowing, and I watched him work, his focus a mirror of my own at his age. Hal sat nearby, munching an apple, his eyes following us, and I sensed his relief, the way our presence eased his burden. We fitted the brace, hammering it into place with stones, the cart creaking as we tested it. Thomas's hands were sure, his movements smoother than I'd expected, and I let him lead, offering only small corrections. "Tighter here," I murmured, pointing to a loose knot, and he nodded, adjusting the leather strap we'd used to bind it. The air smelled of wood and earth, the hay's sweetness mingling with our sweat, and I felt a satisfaction in the work, the kind that comes from making something whole again. Thomas wiped his brow, leaving a streak of dirt, and grinned. "Think it'll hold?" he asked, and I nodded, clapping his back. "It'll get him home, lad. Well done." Hal stood, testing the cart, pushing it gently. It rolled, steady if not perfect, and his face broke into a smile, the lines softening. "You've saved me a week's worry," he said, offering us a small sack of apples, their skins warm from the sun. I took one, passing another to Thomas, and we bit into them, the juice sharp and sweet, a reward for our morning's labor. "No trouble," I said, my voice warm, glad to help. Hal nodded, hitching the cart to his donkey, and we watched him start down the path, the cart rattling softly, the hay secure. We sat in the field after, the grass cool under us, the apples crisp in our hands. The sun was at its peak, the sky a clear blue, and I leaned back, feeling the earth's solidness. "Feels good, doesn't it?" I said, glancing at Thomas. "Fixing things." He nodded, his eyes on the horizon, where the hills rolled gentle and green. "I like you're part of something." His words were simple, but they landed deep, and I smiled, seeing the man he was becoming, steady and kind. I told him a story, my voice blending with the breeze, about a time I'd helped rebuild a bridge after a flood, how the village had come together, sharing tools and laughter. Wasn't just the bridge we fixed, I said. It was us, too. Thomas listened, his apple half eaten, and shared his own memory helping his father patch the mill's roof. How they'd sung to pass the time, their voices echoing in the rafters. Felt like we could do anything, he said. And I nodded, my hand resting on the grass, the memory warming me as much as his. The afternoon was slipping away, the light softening, and we rose, brushing dirt from our tunics. The field was quiet now, the cart's absence a small triumph, and we walked back to the village, our steps unhurried. The air was cooler, the scent of hay fading, replaced by the village's familiar mix of smoke and bread. At the mill, Thomas turned, his face lit by the sun's last rays. "Thanks, Sir Alric," he said, his voice earnest. I nodded, my throat tight. "Good work, lad." He slipped inside, and I headed to the inn, the field's peace lingering, a moment of shared purpose that felt like home. The riverbank was calling today, its gentle flow a whisper in my dreams as I woke to the inn's quiet creaks. The morning was warm, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming clover, and I felt a pull to spend the day simply, with no tasks or lessons. I'd asked Thomas to join me for a picnic by the river, a chance to rest and share the kind of moment that lingers like a soft melody. My tunic was light, my boots worn soft, and I carried a small sack bread, cheese, a flask of watered wine, and a handful of early pears. Thomas was waiting by the mill, his tunic rolled at the sleeves, a straw hat shading his eyes. "Picnic, eh, Sir Alric," he said, his grin bright. I nodded, slinging the sack over my shoulder. "Just you, me, and the river, lad." We walked to the river's edge, the path soft with grass, the village's hum fading behind us. The river was wide here, its water clear, rippling over smooth stones, and willows draped their branches low, their leaves brushing the surface. The air was cool by the bank, smelling of mud and green things, and I spread my cloak on a flat patch of grass, the ground soft beneath. Thomas sat cross-legged, his hat tipped back, and I handed him a pear, its skin pale and cool. He bit into it, juice dribbling down his chin, and laughed, wiping it with his sleeve. I chuckled, settling beside him. The river's song a steady hum that eased my bones. We ate slowly, tearing the bread into chunks, its crust crackling, the cheese sharp and creamy on our tongues. The wine was mild, passed between us in a wooden cup, its taste softened by the river's freshness. The sun filtered through the willows, dappling our cloak with light, and I felt time slow, the world narrowing to this moment, this place. "Good spot," I said, my voice low, blending with the water's flow. Thomas nodded, his eyes on the river, where a fish jumped, leaving ripples that spread and faded. "Used to come here with my sister," he said, his voice soft. "We'd skip stones, pretend we were pirates." I smiled, picturing him, a boy with a stick for a sword, and felt a warmth in my chest. I leaned back, my hands on the cloak, the grass cool beneath, and told him about a river I'd known as a boy, where I'd learned to swim, flailing until my father's laughter made me brave. "Thought I'd drown," I said, my tone light, but the water held me up. Thomas grinned, tearing a piece of bread. "I fell in once. Right here," he admitted, pointing to a shallow bend. Ma was furious, but I kept laughing. I chuckled, the sound mingling with the river's murmur, and we fell quiet, the story settling like pebbles in the current. The air was warm now, the willows swaying gently, and I let my shoulders loosen, my breath sinking with the day's rhythm. The river was alive, dragonflies skimming its surface. A heron stalking the shallows, its steps deliberate. I pointed it out to Thomas, my voice a whisper. See how it waits. Patience like that, it's a kind of strength. He nodded, watching the bird, and I saw him thinking, turning the idea over. We shared another pear, its flesh sweet, and I spoke again, softer now, about a time I'd camped by a river after a long journey, how the water's sound had lulled me to sleep. Felt like the world was singing, I said, and Thomas looked at me, his eyes bright, as if he understood. He told me a memory, his voice shy but clear, about fishing here with his father, how they'd sat in silence, content just to be. Didn't catch much, he said, smiling, but it didn't matter. I nodded, feeling the truth of it, the way some moments need no purpose beyond themselves. The river flowed on, its surface catching the sun in flashes of gold, and I let the sight fill me, the light and water a kind of prayer. Thomas tossed a pebble, watching it skip once, twice, before sinking, and I clapped his shoulder, my hand lingering. Good arm, I said, and he grinned, pleased. We stayed through the afternoon, the sun climbing, then softening, the air growing heavy with warmth. The cloak was scattered with crumbs, the flask empty, but we didn't move, not yet. I spoke of my mother, how she'd taught me to listen to rivers, to hear their stories. Thomas shared how his sister believed the river talked, whispering secrets to the willows. She's probably right, I said, and we laughed, the sound soft, like the rustle of leaves. The heron took flight, its wings a slow beat, and we watched it go. The river's surface still again, reflecting the sky's deepening blue. As the light began to fade, the air cooling, we folded the cloak, brushing off the grass. The river's song was louder now, a steady companion, and I felt a contentment so deep it was almost weightless. Good day, I said, my voice warm, and Thomas nodded, his hat back on, his eyes soft. Sir Alric, perfect. We walked back, the path dim in the twilight, the village's lights glowing ahead. At the mill, he turned, his face half lit by a lantern. Thanks, he said, his voice earnest. I nodded, my throat tight. Anytime, lad. He slipped inside, and I headed to the inn, the river's murmur lingering, a memory of bread and laughter, of a friendship rooted deep in quiet moments. The afternoon was soft and golden, the kind of day that feels like a gift, with a breeze rustling the leaves and carrying the scent of warm earth. I'd spent the morning at the inn, mending a strap on my saddlebag. The leather's familiar, give under my fingers a quiet comfort. But the outdoors called, and I'd asked Thomas to meet me by a willow tree near the village, a spot I'd noticed for its shade and stillness. My tunic was light, my boots dusted from the path, and I carried a small lute, its wood worn smooth, slung across my back. Thomas was there when I arrived, sitting on the grass, his knees drawn up, a blade of grass between his fingers. Sir Alric, he said, his grin bright, eyeing the lute. Going to sing for the birds. I chuckled, settling beside him, the willow's branches swaying above us, their leaves a green curtain. Not quite, lad. Thought I'd teach you a few chords instead. His eyes widened, a mix of surprise and excitement, and he scooted closer. The grass cool under us. The air smelled of river mud and clover, and the willow's shade was cool, dappled with sunlight. I untied the lute, its strings catching the light, and rested it on my knee, my fingers brushing the wood like an old friend. Ever played one, I asked, my voice low, blending with the breeze. He shook his head, his cheeks flushing. No. But I've heard the minstrels. Always wanted to try. I showed him how to hold it, guiding his hands to the neck, his fingers awkward but eager. Light touch, I said, adjusting his grip. Let the strings sing, don't force them. He nodded, his brow furrowed, and I plucked a cord, the sound clear and warm, like a bell in the quiet. The willow seemed to listen, its leaves rustling softly, and I felt the moment settle, a space for learning, for sharing. I played a simple tune, 3 chords in a gentle loop, and let him watch, his eyes following my fingers, his breath slow, as if afraid to break the spell. "Try it," I said, passing the lute. He took it, his hands trembling slightly, and plucked a string, the note wobbling but true. He grinned, trying again, and I nodded, my voice soft. "Good. Now this one." I showed him the next chord, my fingers over his, pressing gently. The sound was rough, but it was a start, and I saw the joy in his face, the kind that comes from making something new. The breeze carried the notes, faint and fleeting, and I let him practice, my corrections gentle, my patience steady. "Loosen your wrist," I murmured, and he did. The chord cleaner now, the lute's voice finding its way. We sat there through the afternoon, the willow's shade a haven, the river's distant murmur a soft backdrop. I told him about my first lute, a battered thing my uncle gave me, how I'd played until my fingers bled, dreaming of ballads. "Never got good," I said, smiling, "but it kept me company." Thomas laughed, his fingers still on the strings, and shared how his sister would dance to market tunes, twirling until she fell dizzy. "She'd love this," he said, plucking a chord, and I nodded, picturing her, a girl with flowers in her hair, spinning under this very tree. The sun moved lower, the light turning amber, and we paused to share a sip of water from my flask, the liquid cool on my tongue. I played a tune I'd learned long ago, a slow melody about a wanderer finding home. And Thomas listened, his hands still, his eyes on the willow's swaying branches. "That's pretty," he said, his voice shy, and I smiled, letting the last note linger. He tried it himself, the chords halting but earnest, and I clapped his shoulder, my hand warm. "You're getting it, lad. Keep at it, and you'll outplay me." We traded the lute back and forth, the notes weaving a quiet conversation. I spoke of a minstrel I'd met on the road, an old man whose songs could hush a tavern, his fingers dancing like they knew the world's secrets. Thomas told of a harvest festival where a fiddler played until dawn, the village dancing under the stars. "Felt like magic," he said, and I nodded, feeling the same about this moment, the lute's soft hum binding us closer. The air was warm, the grass soft, and I let my shoulders relax, my breath sinking with the day's slow rhythm. The willow's shade deepened as the afternoon waned, the light filtering through in golden patches. Thomas's chords were surer now, his fingers finding their place, and I saw the pride in his eyes, the quiet thrill of learning. I played one last tune, a lullaby my mother used to sing, its notes like a river's flow, and Thomas watched, his face soft, as if remembering his own lullabies. "Try that one," I said, and he did. The melody stumbling but sweet, the willow's leaves seeming to sway in time. As the sun dipped, the air cooling, we set the lute aside, the grass scattered with our footprints. I felt a contentment so deep it was almost weightless, the kind that comes from sharing something small but true. "Good day," I said, my voice warm, and Thomas nodded, his hat back on, his smile steady. "Aye, Sir Ulrich, really good." We rose, brushing grass from our tunics, and walked back, the village's lights glowing in the twilight. At the mill, he turned, his face half lit by a lantern. "Thanks for the music," he said, his voice earnest. I nodded, my throat tight. "Any time, lad." He slipped inside, and I headed to the inn. The lute's weight light on my back, its chords echoing in my heart, a memory of a friendship sung under a willow's shade. The evening was cold, the kind of chill that creeps under your cloak and makes you crave a fire's warmth. Snow had begun to fall, soft flakes drifting through the air, blanketing Eldermore in a hush. I'd spent the day at the inn, oiling my boots by the hearth, but the snow called me out, its quiet magic too strong to resist. I'd asked Thomas to meet me at the village tavern, a sturdy building with glowing windows, where we could share stories and escape the cold. My tunic was layered with a woolen vest, my cloak heavy, and I walked through the snow, my boots crunching, the air sharp with the scent of pine and frost. The village was still, its light softened by the falling flakes, and I felt a peace settle over me, like a blanket fresh from the loom. The tavern was warm when I stepped inside, the air thick with the smells of ale, bread, and wood smoke. The room was alive with low voices, the clink of mugs, and the crackle of a fire in the hearth. Thomas was already there, tucked in a corner near the flames, his cheeks red from the cold, his cloak draped over a chair. "Sir Alric," he said, waving me over, his grin bright in the firelight. I settled across from him, the wooden table worn smooth, and a serving girl brought us mugs of warmed cider, its steam curling like the snow outside. "To winter," I said, raising my mug, and Thomas clinked his against it, his eyes sparkling. "To stories," he added, and I nodded, feeling the moment's warmth deepen. We sipped the cider, its spices soft on my tongue, and I leaned back, the fire's glow painting the room in shades of gold. The snow fell heavier now, visible through a small window, its flakes dancing in the dark. "Perfect night for tales," I said, my voice low, blending with the tavern's hum. Thomas nodded, his hands wrapped around his mug, and I started with a story, one that fit the snow's quiet. Years ago, I'd been caught in a blizzard, my horse and I huddling in a cave, the wind howling like a beast. "Thought I'd freeze," I said, my tone soft, but the cave was warm, and I sang to keep my spirits up. The memory was vivid, the ice on my cloak, the echo of my voice, the slow dawn that followed. Thomas listened, his eyes wide, the firelight flickering in them. He took a sip, then shared his own tale, his voice shy but clear. "Last winter, I snuck out to see the snow," he said, smiling. "Built a snowman by the mill, all lopsided. My sister helped, but we forgot gloves. Hands were numb for hours." I chuckled, picturing them, two figures in the dark, their laughter muffled by the snow. "Sounds like a fine snowman," I said, and he grinned, the memory warming him as much as the cider. The tavern's noise faded, the fire our world, its crackle a rhythm for our stories. I told another about a winter festival I'd seen, where villagers lit lanterns and skated on a frozen pond, their breath clouding in the air. "Looked like stars on the ice," I said, and Thomas leaned forward, his mug forgotten. Picturing it, he spoke of a night he'd stayed up with his father, watching snow bury the fields, the mill's wheel frozen still. "Da told me stories of his Da," he said, his voice soft. Felt like they were there with us. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words, the way family lingered in the quiet of a snowy night. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney, and I added a log, the flames flaring briefly, warming my hands. We ordered bread and cheese, the loaf warm, the cheese sharp, and shared it, tearing pieces with our fingers. The tavern was quieter now, some patrons leaving, their cloaks dusted with snow. I spoke of a night I'd known, an old man who'd sit by a fire in winter, telling tales of battles long past. His voice was like this fire, I said, gesturing to the hearth, warm, steady, made you feel safe. Thomas smiled, then told of a neighbor who'd spin ghost stories by candlelight, scaring him and his sister until they hid under blankets. "We loved it, though," he admitted, and I laughed, the sound low, blending with the snow's hush outside. The night deepened, the fire burning lower, its embers glowing red. I felt a contentment, the kind that comes from stories shared in a warm room, the world outside forgotten. Thomas's eyes were heavy, his yawns coming more often, but he fought them, reluctant to leave. I told one last tale, about a winter morning when I'd woken to a world so still. The snow seemed to hold its breath, felt like I was part of it, I said, my voice a murmur. Thomas nodded, his voice sleepy. Like tonight. I smiled, clapping his shoulder gently. Aye, lad, like tonight. We rose, the tavern nearly empty, the fire a soft glow. I paid for our meal, leaving a coin for the serving girl, and we stepped into the snow, the cold sharp after the hearth's warmth. The village was a dream, its shape softened, the flakes still falling, light as feathers. We walked slowly, our boots leaving tracks, the silence between us comfortable, full of the night's stories. At the mill, Thomas turned, his face lit by a lantern's glow, snow in his hair. Thanks, Sir Alric, he said, his voice earnest. I nodded, my throat tight. Sleep well, lad. He slipped inside, and I headed to the inn. The snow's quiet wrapping around me, the tavern's warmth a memory to carry into the night. The morning was crisp, with a hint of spring's promise lingering in the air, though autumn still held Eldermoor in its golden embrace. I woke to the soft coo of doves outside the inn, their calls weaving through the quiet creaks of the wooden floor. Today felt like a day for beauty, for pausing to notice the world's small wonders. And I'd planned to walk with Thomas through the castle gardens just beyond the village. A place I'd heard was open to all after the harvest. My tunic was clean, its fabric soft from wear, and I left my cloak behind, the sun's warmth enough. Thomas was waiting by the stable, his hair mussed, a blade of grass between his teeth. Gardens. Sir Alric, he said, his grin teasing. Didn't peg you for flowers. I chuckled, nudging his shoulder. There's more to life than swords, lad. Come on. The path to the castle was gentle, winding past fields where workers stacked hay, their voices a distant hum. The air smelled of earth and apples, and the sky was a clear blue, streaked with wisps of cloud. The castle loomed ahead, its stone walls softened by ivy, and the garden spread before it, a patchwork of color roses, lavender, marigolds, their petals bright against the green. A wooden gate stood open, creaking as we passed, and the scent of blooms hit me, sweet and heady, like a memory of summer. Thomas's eyes widened, his steps slowing, and I felt the same pull. The garden's quiet beauty, a world apart from the village's bustle. We wandered the paths, gravel crunching under our boots, the air warm with the sun's touch. Roses climbed trellises, their reds and pinks vivid, and I brushed a petal, its texture like silk. My mother loved roses, I said, my voice low, blending with the hum of bees. Had a bush by our door, always fussin' over it. Thomas nodded, his fingers grazing a lavender sprig, releasing its sharp, clean scent. My sister picks these, he said, holding it up, puts them in her hair. I smiled, picturing her, and we walked on, the garden wrapping us in its calm, the flowers a silent song. The paths curved around a small fountain, its water trickling over mossy stones, the sound a soft counterpoint to the breeze. We sat on a stone bench nearby, the surface cool, the roses framing us in a riot of color. I leaned back, my hands on my knees, and let the moment settle, the garden's peace sinking into my bones. Places like this, I said, my tone gentle, they remind you to look up, to see what's good. Thomas nodded, his eyes on the fountain, its ripples catching the light. Feels like it's just for us, he said, and I felt the truth of it, the garden, a gift we shared. I told him a story, my voice blending with the water's murmur, about a garden I'd seen in a far-off town, where monks grew herbs for healing, their hands gentle as prayers. Smelled like this, I said, inhaling the lavender's tang, made me feel whole, just standing there. Thomas listened, his fingers twirling the lavender sprig, and shared his own memory of helping his mother plant marigolds by their cottage. How she'd laughed when he got dirt in his hair. "They're still there," he said, his voice soft, bright as ever. I clapped his shoulder, my hand warm, feeling the thread of our stories weaving tighter, like roots beneath the earth. We rose, wandering deeper, where hedges formed quiet nooks and roses gave way to wilder blooms, daisies, foxgloves, their petals swaying in the breeze. I pointed out a bee, heavy with pollen, bumbling from flower to flower, and Thomas grinned, following its path. "Busy little thing," he said, and I nodded, my voice low, doing its work, same as us. The air was warmer now, the sun higher, and I felt a lightness, the garden's beauty a balm for the soul. We paused by a rose bush, its thorns sharp, but its flowers soft, and I plucked a fallen petal, tucking it into my pocket. A small keepsake. Thomas found a daisy, its center a perfect sun, and held it out, his grin shy. "For my sister," he said, and I nodded, my heart full. We shared a moment of silence, the fountain's trickle filling the space, and I felt a connection, not just to Thomas, but to the garden, to the hands that had planted it, tended it. I spoke again, softer now, about a knight I'd known who carried a pressed flower in his pouch. A reminder of home, kept him grounded, I said, and Thomas nodded, his daisy safe in his hand, as if he understood. The afternoon waned, the light softening, and we turned back, the gravel paths leading us to the gate. The castle shadow stretched long, but the garden's warmth stayed with us, its colors vivid in my mind. "Good walk," I said, my voice warm, and Thomas nodded, his eyes bright, the lavender sprig tucked into his belt. I, Sir Alric, never saw roses like that. We passed through the gate, the village coming into view, its chimneys puffing smoke. At the mill, he turned, his face lit by the fading sun. "Thanks," he said, his voice earnest. I nodded, my throat tight. "Anytime, lad." He slipped inside, and I headed to the inn, the rose petal in my pocket, the garden's peace a memory of friendship, blooming like the flowers we'd left behind. The morning light was gentle, filtering through the inn's window with a soft glow that promised a quiet day. I woke to the distant crow of a rooster, the air cool and carrying the faint scent of damp wood. My hands itched for something to do, something small and meaningful, and I decided to spend the day carving a gift for Thomas, a wooden horse, simple but heartfelt, to mark our time together. My tunic was soft, my knife sharp in its sheath, and I gathered a small piece of oak from the innkeeper's woodpile, its grain smooth under my fingers. Thomas was waiting by the stable, leaning against a post, his breath visible in the crisp air. "What's the plan, Sir Alric?" he asked, his eyes curious. Catching the wood in my hand, I smiled, tucking it into my belt. "A surprise, lad. Let's find a quiet spot." We walked to a clearing just beyond the village, where a lone elm stood, its branches bare against the pale sky. The grass was damp with dew, cushioning our steps, and the air smelled of earth and faint clover. I spread my cloak on the ground, gesturing for Thomas to sit, and settled beside him, the wood in my lap, my knife glinting in the morning light. "Going to carve something?" I said, my voice low, blending with the breeze. "A horse. For you?" His eyes widened, a grin spreading across his face, and he leaned closer, eager but patient, his hands resting on his knees. I started carving, the knife moving slowly, peeling thin curls of wood that fell like petals. The oak was soft but strong, yielding to the blade, and I let my hands find the shape, the horse's form emerging bit by bit. Thomas watched, his breath slow, his eyes following each cut, and I felt the clearing stillness wrap around us, a space for this small act of giving. Ever carved anything, I asked, my tone gentle, keeping the rhythm of the work? He nodded, picking at a blade of grass. Made a whistle once, for my sister. Barely worked, but she loved it. I chuckled, picturing her, a girl with a crooked whistle, and nodded. That's the point, lad. It's the heart in it. The knife moved steadily, shaping the horse's head, its arched neck, the suggestion of a mane. The air was warming, the sun climbing, and I told Thomas a story, my voice soft, to match the morning's hush. My father taught me to carve, I said, smoothing a rough edge, sat me by a fire, showed me how to see the shape before cutting, made a bird that looked more like a lump, but I kept it. The memory was warm, the fire's glow in my mind, and Thomas smiled, his eyes on the horse taking form. He shared his own tale about whittling a stick into a sword as a boy, brandishing it until it snapped. Thought I was a knight, he said, laughing, and I joined him, the sound blending with the rustle of leaves. We paused to share a sip of water from my flask, the liquid cool, grounding us. I carved on, the horse's legs now clear, its body rounded, and Thomas leaned closer, his curiosity a quiet presence. How do you know where to cut? He asked, his voice soft, and I paused, holding the wood up. You feel it, I said, my fingers tracing the grain. The wood tells you, if you listen. He nodded, his eyes thoughtful, and I saw him learning, not just about carving, but about patience, about trust. The elm's shadow shifted, the light softer now, and I let the work be our world, the knife's soft scrape a steady pulse. I told another story about a carver I'd met on the road, an old woman whose hands turned scraps into figures so lifelike they seemed to breathe. She said every piece holds a story, I said, smoothing the horse's flank. Thomas listened, then spoke of his father, how he'd carved spoons by lamplight, each one different. Gave one to my ma, he said, his voice tender, and she still uses it. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words, the way small things carried love. The horse was nearly done, its shape clear, and I polished it with my thumb, the wood warm, alive. The morning stretched into noon, the air heavier, the clearing bright with sunlight. I finished the horse, its lines simple but true, and held it out to Thomas, my hand steady. For you, I said, my voice warm, and he took it, his fingers careful, his eyes wide with wonder. It's perfect, he said, turning it over, tracing the mane, the legs. I smiled, my heart full, and clapped his shoulder, my hand lingering. Keep it close, lad, a reminder of today. He nodded, tucking it into his pocket, his grin so bright it rivaled the sun. We rose, folding the cloak, the grass scattered with wood shavings, like fallen stars. The clearing felt sacred, a place where a gift had been made, a bond strengthened. Good day, I said, my voice soft, and Thomas nodded, his hand brushing the pocket where the horse rested. I, Sir Ulrich, the best. We walked back, the village's hum growing louder, the air warm with the scent of hay and bread. At the mill, he turned, his face lit by the noon light. Thank you, he said, his voice earnest, the horse a weight between us. I nodded, my throat tight. Any time, lad. He slipped inside, and I headed to the inn, the carving's memory a warmth in my hands, a friendship shaped as surely as the wood. The sun was high, painting Eldermore in shades of gold as I stepped out of the inn, the air warm with the scent of dust and blooming heather. Today was for celebration, a tournament held in the fields beyond the village, where knights and locals gathered to test their skill and share in the joy of a bright day. My tunic was clean, my boots polished, and I felt a lightness, the kind that comes with a crowd's laughter and the promise of a spectacle. Thomas was waiting by the stable, his eyes bright, his tunic swapped for a brighter one, green as the fields. "Tournament day, Sir Alric," he said, his voice bubbling with excitement. I grinned, clapping his shoulder. "Aye, lad, let's cheer some knights and eat some pie." We walked to the tournament grounds, the path alive with villagers, their voices a cheerful hum, children darting ahead with ribbons in their hair. The air smelled of roasted meat and fresh straw, and the fields opened wide, ringed by colorful banners flapping in the breeze. Wooden stands were packed with spectators, their cheers rising as we approached, and a jousting lane stretched down the center, its earth packed smooth. Thomas's steps quickened, his head turning to take it all in, and I followed, my heart lifted by his enthusiasm, the day's energy wrapping us like a warm cloak. We found a spot near the fence, close enough to feel the thunder of hooves, the grass soft under our boots. The first knights rode out, their armor glinting, their horses snorting, and the crowd roared, Thomas clapping beside me, his grin wide. "Look at that lance," he said, pointing as a knight in blue lowered his weapon, steady and sure. I nodded, leaning on the fence, the wood warm under my palms. "Good form," I said, my voice low, blending with the crowd's hum. "Watch his balance, lad." Thomas did, his eyes sharp, and I felt a quiet pride, knowing he was learning even in this moment of play. The joust began, the knights charging, lances splintering with a crack that sent the crowd to its feet. Thomas cheered, his voice lost in the roar, and I joined him, my laugh deep, the thrill infectious. The Blue Knight stayed seated, his opponent tumbling to the dirt, and Thomas grabbed my arm, his excitement spilling over. "Did you see that he shouted?" And I nodded, ruffling his hair. "Aye, lad, a clean hit." We settled back, the sun warm on our faces, and I told him a story, my voice soft amid the noise, about my first tournament, how I'd been a squire, polishing armor and dreaming of the lance. "Nervous as a colt," I said, smiling, but it taught me to keep steady. Thomas listened, then shared his own memory, his voice bright. "Last year, I watched from the hill," he said, gesturing to a rise beyond the field, "sneaked out of chores, saw a knight in red win it all." I chuckled, picturing him, a boy hiding in the grass, eyes wide with wonder. The next joust started, and we cheered again, the horses' hooves a drumbeat, the crowd's energy a living thing. Between matches, we wandered to a stall, buying meat pies, their crusts flaky, the filling hot and savory. We ate leaning on the fence, crumbs falling to the grass, and Thomas licked his fingers, grinning. "Better than the mill's porridge," he said, and I laughed, the pie's warmth settling in my chest. The tournament rolled on, swords clashing in the melee, archers firing at straw targets, their arrows whistling. Thomas was rapt, his cheers louder with each bout, and I let myself sink into the moment, the sun, the crowd, the boy beside me. I spoke of a knight I'd known, a quiet man who fought not for glory, but for his family's honor. Never boasted, I said, my voice warm, just did his work. Thomas nodded, his eyes on a young knight adjusting his helm, and told me about a village lad who'd tried the archery last year, missing every shot but laughing all the same. Everyone clapped anyway, he said, and I smiled, seeing the kindness in his heart. The afternoon waned, the light softening, the crowd's cheers gentler now. We stayed for the final joust, a knight in silver against one in green, their lances shattering in a draw that left the crowd roaring. Thomas was on his toes, clapping until his hands must have stung, and I joined him, my voice hoarse but happy. As the knights bowed, the tournament ending, we sat on the grass, sharing a last pie, the air cooling, the banners still bright. "Best day," Thomas said, his voice soft, his eyes on the field. I nodded, my hand resting on his shoulder. Lad. One to remember. We walked back as dusk settled, the village glowing with lanterns, the air sharp with evening's chill. The tournament's echoes lingered, hooves, cheers, the crack of lances, and I felt full, not just of pie, but of the day's joy. At the mill, Thomas turned, his face lit by a lantern's glow, his green tunic dusty but bright. "Thanks, Sir Ulrich," he said, his voice earnest, carrying the weight of our shared cheers. I nodded, my throat tight. "Anytime, lad." He slipped inside, and I headed to the inn. The field's warmth a memory, a friendship forged in the roar of a tournament, strong as any lance. The forest was quiet this afternoon, its air cool and thick with the scent of pine and damp moss. I'd woken to a soft dawn, the inn's window framing a sky streaked with gray, and felt a pull to return to the woods with Thomas, to create something lasting between us. My tunic was warm, my cloak slung over my shoulder, and I carried a small pouch with twine and a knife, my boots steady on the path. Thomas was waiting by the village's edge, his hair damp from a morning mist, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Back to the forest, Sir Ulrich?" he asked, falling into step beside me, his tunic patched but clean. I nodded, my voice low. "Lad. Thought we'd make something special today." We walked deeper into the woods, the path narrowing, the trees closing around us like old friends. The ground was soft, carpeted with needles, and the light filtered through the canopy in golden patches, warm despite the autumn chill. I led us to a clearing I'd found before, where a fallen log lay, its bark mossy, and a small stream gurgled nearby, its water clear over smooth stones. The air was alive with the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a thrush, and I felt the forest's peace settle over me, a space for what I had in mind. "Here," I said, spreading my cloak on the ground. Thomas sat, his knees drawn up, watching as I knelt, my hands brushing the earth. I pulled the twine from my pouch, its fibers rough, and held it up. "We're making a ritual, lad," I said, my voice soft, blending with the stream's murmur, something to mark our friendship, to carry with us. His eyes widened, a mix of wonder and solemnity, and he nodded, leaning closer. I showed him how to braid the twine, my fingers slow, weaving 3 strands into a tight cord. "Each strand's a promise," I said, my tone steady. "Loyalty, trust, care." He took a length of twine, his hands clumsy at first, but he mimicked me, his brow furrowed in concentration. The forest quiet holding us. We worked side by side, the braiding a rhythm, like the heartbeat of the woods. The air smelled of earth and water, the moss cool under my knees, and I told a story, my voice low, to fit the moment. "When I was a squire," I said, smoothing a knot, "my knight gave me a braided cord like this. Said it tied us, no matter the miles." The memory was vivid. The firelight, his gruff voice, the cord's weight in my palm, and Thomas listened, his fingers pausing, then moving again, the twine taking shape. He shared his own memory, his voice shy. "My ma braided my sister's hair once, for a festival, said it was love, woven tight." I smiled, nodding, feeling the truth of it, our stories braiding like the cords. The stream gurgled, its sound a soft counterpoint to our work, and I showed Thomas how to tie off the braid, a simple knot to seal it. His cord was uneven, but strong, and he held it up, his grin proud. "Looks good," he said, and I clapped his shoulder, my hand warm. "It's more than good, lad. It's ours. We made 2 more, one for each of us," and I tied mine around my wrist, the twine rough but comforting, a reminder of this day. Thomas did the same, his fingers careful, and I saw the weight of the act in his eyes, the way it bound us deeper than words. We stood, walking to the stream, the cords on our wrists catching the light. I knelt, cupping water in my hands, its cold biting my skin, and splashed it over the log, a small blessing for our ritual. "For the forest," I said, my voice a murmur, "for what it's seen." Thomas copied me, his splash softer, his face solemn but bright, and I felt the clearing shift, as if the trees approved, their branches swaying gently. The air was cooler now, the sun lower, and I spoke again. Softer still. "This is us, lad. Wherever we go, this stays." He nodded, his eyes on the stream, the twine a quiet vow. We sat again, sharing a piece of bread from my pouch, its crust breaking softly, the taste grounding us. I told him about a ritual I'd seen in a far-off village, where friends tied cords to a tree, wishing for long lives. "Felt like they'd never part," I said, and Thomas listened, his bread half-eaten, his cord glinting on his wrist. He spoke of his sister, how she'd tie ribbons on her bedpost, each one a hope. "Silly, maybe," he said, but I shook my head, my voice warm. "Not silly. It's heart." The stream flowed on, the light fading, and I felt a peace so deep it was almost weightless, the ritual sealing something eternal. The forest grew dim, the air sharp with evening's chill, and we rose, folding the cloak, the clearing scattered with twine scraps, like fallen leaves. "Good day," I said, my voice soft, and Thomas nodded, his hand brushing his wrist, the cord a steady presence. "Aye, Sir Alric. One I won't forget." We walked back, the path familiar, the village's lights glowing through the trees. At the mill, he turned, his face lit by a faint starlight, the cord a shadow on his skin. "Thanks," he said, his voice earnest. I nodded, my throat tight. "Always, lad." He slipped inside, and I headed to the inn, the twine warm on my wrist, the forest ritual a memory of friendship, woven as tight as our cords. The night was warm, with a harvest moon hanging low, its golden glow bathing Elder Moor in a soft, dreamlike light. I'd spent the day at the inn, polishing my sword by the window, the blade's familiar weight a quiet comfort. But the moon's call was stronger, pulling me to share its beauty with Thomas. My tunic was soft, my cloak left behind, the air too gentle for extra layers. I'd asked him to meet me by a hill just outside the village, where the fields stretched wide and the sky felt endless. My boots whispered on the path, the air thick with the scent of ripe grain and dew, and I felt a stillness settle over me, the kind that comes when the world pauses to breathe. Thomas was there when I reached the hill, sitting on a blanket, his silhouette sharp against the moon's glow. His knees were drawn up, his hands clasped, and he turned as I approached, his grin bright in the silver light. "Sir Alric," he said, his voice low, almost swallowed by the night's hush. I settled beside him, the grass cool through the blanket, my legs stretched out, the hill slope cradling us. The moon was full, its face pocked with shadows, and the air smelled of earth and faint lavender from nearby fields. "Fine night," I murmured, my eyes on the sky, and Thomas nodded, his gaze upward, a quiet wonder in his face. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that feels like a shared breath, the moon's light wrapping us in its glow. The fields below shimmered, their stalks swaying in a gentle breeze, and the distant hum of crickets wove a soft lullaby. I let my hands rest on the blanket, the fabric worn but warm, and felt the moment deepen, a chance to reflect on the journey we'd shared, the training, the laughter, the small acts that had built our bond. "Look at that moon," I said, my voice soft, blending with the night. "Makes you think, doesn't it?" Thomas tilted his head, his eyes tracing its curve. Like it's watching us, keeping our stories. I smiled, feeling the truth of his words, and spoke a memory, my tone slow, to match the moon's steady light. "When I was a boy," I said, "my father took me to a hill like this, under a moon just as full. Told me it was a time to dream, to let your heart speak." The memory was vivid, the cool grass, his low voice, the moon's glow on his weathered face, and Thomas listened, his hands still, his face soft in the light. He shared his own, his voice shy but clear. "My ma used to say the harvest moon was for giving thanks. We'd sit by the mill, counting stars." I nodded, picturing them, a family bathed in silver, and felt a warmth in my chest, our stories meeting like streams in a river. The moon climbed higher, its light softening the world's edges, and I leaned back, my hands behind my head, the blanket's weave pressing into my palms. I told Thomas about my first night as a knight, how I'd stood under a moon like this, my heart full of hope and fear, wondering what my life would hold. Felt like the moon knew. I said, my voice a murmur, like it was waiting for me to catch up. He grinned, his teeth flashing, and spoke of a night he'd snuck out to see the moon, lying in a field until dawn, dreaming of adventures. "Wanted to be like you," he admitted, and I clapped his shoulder, my hand lingering, my throat tight with his words. We stayed quiet then, the cricket song filling the space, the breeze cool on my face. The fields glowed below, their gold turned silver, and I felt time slow, each moment a pearl strung on the night's thread. I spoke again, softer now, about the road ahead. How our time in Eldermore was a chapter, not the whole book. "You'll carry this." "Lad," I said, my hand brushing the twine on my wrist, the cord from our forest ritual. "Wherever you go." Thomas nodded, his fingers touching his own cord, his eyes on the moon, and I saw the weight of it settle, a promise he'd keep. He told me a dream, his voice barely above the breeze, about seeing the world one day, not as a knight, but as himself, helping where he could, like we helped that traveler, he said, and I smiled, seeing the man he'd become, steady and kind. The moon watched, its light a blessing, and I let the moment hold us, the hill a sanctuary for our thoughts. We shared a sip of water from my flask, the liquid cool, grounding, and I felt a peace so deep it was almost weightless, the kind that comes when you've built something true. The night deepened, the air cooler, the stars brighter around the moon's glow. Thomas's yawns came softly, his eyes heavy, and I smiled, my voice a whisper. Time to head back. "Lad." He nodded, reluctant, and we folded the blanket, the grass damp under our boots. The walk to the village was slow, the moon lighting our path, the air sharp with night's chill. At the mill, he turned, his face silvered by the light, his cord glinting. "Thanks, Sir Alric," he said, his voice earnest, carrying the night's weight. I nodded, my throat tight. "Sleep well, lad." He slipped inside, and I headed to the inn, the moon's glow lingering, a memory of dreams shared under its watchful eye. The afternoon was soft, with a breeze that carried the scent of fading leaves and distant wood smoke through Eldermore. I'd woken to a quiet inn, the light through my window pale and gentle, and felt a weight in my chest not heavy, but full, like the moment before a farewell. My time in the village was drawing to a close, and I wanted to leave Thomas with something lasting, a symbol of the trust we'd built. My tunic was clean, my boots worn soft, and I carried my old shield, its oak battered but strong, its paint chipped from years of use. Thomas was waiting by the stable, leaning against a post, his eyes curious as he saw the shield in my arms. "What's that for, Sir Ulrich?" he asked, his voice light but tinged with something deeper. I smiled, resting the shield against the wall. "A gift, lad. Let's take a walk." We headed to a meadow just beyond the village, the same one where we'd trained that first day. Its grass now tinged with autumn's gold. The air was warm, the sky a soft blue, and the meadow hummed with the buzz of late bees and the rustle of leaves. I carried the shield, its weight familiar, a companion through battles I'd left behind. Thomas walked beside me, his steps steady, his hands in his pockets, and I felt the quiet between us. Not empty, but full, like the pause before a song. The meadow opened before us, wildflowers nodding in the breeze, and I set the shield down, its edge sinking into the earth, the wood catching the sunlight. I knelt, brushing my hand over the shield's surface, its scars telling stories of lances, swords, and long-ago nights. "This was mine," I said, my voice low, blending with the meadow's hum, carried it through more than I can count. "Now it's yours." Thomas's eyes widened, his breath catching, and he stepped closer, his fingers hovering over the wood, as if afraid to touch it. "Mine," he whispered, and I nodded, meeting his gaze, my hand steady on the shield. "You've earned it, lad, not for battles, but for what you carry here." I tapped my chest, and he swallowed, his eyes bright, understanding the weight of my words. We sat on the grass, the shield between us, its presence a quiet vow. The air smelled of clover and earth, and I told him a story, my voice soft, to fit the moment. "First time I held this shield," I said, tracing a dent near the rim. "I was younger than you, scared I'd drop it. My knight said it wasn't the wood that mattered, but the heart behind it. The memory was vivid. The training yard, the shield's heft." My knight's gruff nod, and Thomas listened, his hands on his knees, his face soft in the sunlight. He shared his own memory, his voice shy but clear. "When you gave me that wooden sword, I felt bigger, like I could be something." I smiled, my throat tight, feeling the thread of our journey weaving tighter. I showed him the shield's details, the straps, worn soft from my grip, the iron rim, nicked but solid, the faint trace of a crest, faded by time. "It's not perfect," I said, my fingers brushing a crack, "but it's true, like us." Thomas nodded, his hand finally touching the wood, his touch careful, reverent. I taught him how to hold it, adjusting his stance, my hands gentle but firm, the way I'd done with the sword months ago. He lifted it, his arms trembling slightly, but his eyes were steady, and I stepped back, letting him feel its weight. The meadow's quiet holding us. The sun was lower now, painting the grass in hues of amber, and we sat again, the shield resting against a stone. I spoke of trust, my voice a murmur, about how it's built in small moments, training, stories, the choice to stand side by side. "This shield's a piece of that," I said, my eyes on his, "a reminder you're not alone." Thomas nodded, his fingers tracing the wood, and told me how he'd trusted me that first day. Despite his fear, because I'd seen him, not just the miller's boy, meant everything, he said, and I clapped his shoulder, my hand lingering, my heart full. We shared a moment of silence, the breeze cool on my face, the meadow alive with its own soft music. I felt time slow, each breath a gift, the shield a bridge between our past and whatever lay ahead. I told one last story, about a knight who passed his shield to his squire, not for war but for life, a legacy of care. Thomas listened, then spoke of his sister, how he wanted to protect her, to be the kind of man she'd look up to. "Like you," he said, and I swallowed, my voice thick. "You already are, lad." The light was fading, the air cooler, and we rose, the shield in Thomas's arms now, its weight his to carry. The meadow seemed to watch, its flowers bowing in the breeze, and I felt a peace so deep it was almost weightless, the act of giving sealing our bond. "Good day," I said, my voice warm, and Thomas nodded, his grip tight on the shield, his eyes bright. "Aye, Sir Ulrich, one I'll keep." We walked back, the village's lights glowing, the path familiar under our boots. At the mill, he turned, the shield glinting in the twilight, his face earnest. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying the meadow's weight. I nodded, my throat tight. "Always, lad." He slipped inside, and I headed to the inn, the shield's absence light in my hands, a friendship forged in trust, strong as oak. The evening was gentle, the air cool and carrying the faint scent of wood smoke as the sun dipped below Eldermoor's hills. I'd woken with a quiet certainty, knowing tonight would be our last campfire, a moment to close the chapter we'd written together. My tunic was soft, my cloak warm around my shoulders, and I carried a small bundle bread, a flask of cider, kindling for the fire. Thomas was waiting by the clearing we'd used before, his figure small against the twilight, the wooden horse I'd carved tucked in his pocket, the shield I'd given him leaning against a tree. "Sir Ulrich," he said, his voice soft, his eyes bright with the weight of the night. I nodded, setting the bundle down, my hand brushing his shoulder. "One last fire, lad. Let's make it a good one." We gathered wood, our steps quiet on the mossy ground, the clearing a familiar haven, its trees standing like silent witnesses. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the sky was a deep blue, pricked with early stars. I arranged the kindling, striking flint until a spark caught, the flame small but steady, growing as I fed it twigs. Thomas knelt beside me, adding a branch, his hands sure now, the firelight painting his face in shades of gold. We sat back, the moss cool beneath us, the fire's warmth a soft embrace, and I felt time slow, each crackle a note in the night's lullaby. I handed him the bread, its crust breaking softly, and poured cider into a wooden cup, passing it between us. The cider was sweet, its warmth spreading through my chest, and we ate in silence for a moment. The fire's glow, our world. "Been a good journey," I said, my voice low, blending with the cricket's hum. Thomas nodded, his eyes on the flames, the shield catching the light nearby. "Aye, Sir Ulrich, more than I ever thought." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of our months together, and I smiled, my heart full, like a cup brimming over. I told a story, my voice soft, to fit the fire's quiet dance. "Last campfire I shared like this," I said, leaning back, "was with my old knight before I took my vows. We talked of dreams, not battles what we hoped to leave behind. The memory was vivid, the stars above, his gruff laugh, the fire's warmth, and Thomas listened, his bread forgotten, his face soft in the glow. He shared his own dream, his voice shy but clear. "Want to make things better?" he said, his fingers brushing the horse in his pocket. "For my family, the village, maybe further." I nodded, seeing the man he'd become, his heart as strong as the shield I'd given him, and clapped his shoulder, my hand lingering. The fire burned steady, its embers glowing red, and I spoke again, slower now, about the road ahead, I'm leaving soon. Lad, I said, my eyes on the flames, but you've got everything you need here. I tapped my chest, and he swallowed, his eyes bright, not with tears but with something deeper, a resolve I'd helped kindle. He nodded, his voice thick. I'll keep learning, Sir Alric, for you, for me. I smiled, my throat tight, and we fell quiet. The fire's crackle filling the space, the stars above keeping watch, their light a promise of tomorrow. We added logs, the flames flaring briefly, and I told one last story about a knight who found home not in a castle, but in the people he cared for, their trust, his true shield. Thomas listened, then spoke of his sister, how she'd hug him after his mill work, her laughter, his anchor. She's my home, he said, and I nodded, feeling the truth of it, the way love tethered us, no matter the miles. The cider was gone, the breadcrumbs scattered, but we stayed, the fire's warmth enough, the clearing a sanctuary for our farewell. The night deepened, the air cooler, the stars brighter, and I felt Thomas's yawns, his eyes heavy with the fire's lull. Time to rest, lad, I whispered, my voice a murmur, and he nodded, reluctant but ready. We banked the fire, its embers soft and red and rose, the moss springy under our boots. Thomas lifted the shield, its weight steady in his arms, and I folded the blanket, the clearing quiet now, its magic lingering. We walked back, the village's lights faint, the path lit by starlight, our steps slow, savoring the last moments. At the mill, Thomas turned, his face half lit by a lantern, the shield glinting, the horse safe in his pocket. Thank you. Sir Ulrich, he said, his voice earnest, carrying the fire's warmth. I nodded, my throat tight, my hand resting on his shoulder one last time. You're ready, lad. Keep the fire burning. He smiled, small but strong, and slipped inside, the door creaking shut. I stood there, the night wrapping around me, the stars above a silent farewell. Then headed to the inn. The campfire's glow, a memory, a friendship that would never fade. This tale of Sir Alric and Thomas was about more than a knight and his squire. It was about the quiet moments that forge a bond, the small acts of trust, laughter, and care that build a friendship stronger than any shield. From training in meadows to sharing stories by firelight, they wove a tapestry of loyalty, each thread a memory of kindness. For you, listening now, let this story remind you of those who've walked beside you, their presence a light in your own journey. If you've enjoyed this tale, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories to soothe your nights. Share this with someone who's been your Thomas or Alric, and let them know they're not forgotten. Now, as the embers fade, let your eyes grow heavy, your breath slow, and drift into a dream where friendship glows like a harvest moon, soft and eternal. Good night.